text you if
Okay, if anything happens.
should
We
be.
just can't have more than two
Got it.
board members at events, so. I think our next one should be four.
And we're ready.
Okay. All right, it's not like an official meeting, so we're here to talk about budget.
All right, good evening, directors. Yes, I guess the official title is a workshop, right?
Yes.
Okay,
So,
so,
I'll just say, so this is the, 'cause Mike wasn't here yet. We decided to do workshops before each study session. And hopefully everybody can attend them, but if not, we understand it's 5 o'clock, but to just kind of go in deeper on some stuff and informal training and stuff like that, so. All right.
all right, so this is the first of two parts. There's two separate PowerPoints. The first one is intended for this meeting from 5 to 6, and the second one will be from 6 to 7 or at the 6 o'clock meeting. So my goal was of this first one is to kind of give you just a very brief overview as far as public school finance is concerned. I know a number of our directors are new. This is probably new to you, and it can be very complicated. Again, I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. It is just the truth. The state of Washington, public school finance in the state of Washington is one of the most complex in the United States. There are other states that are much simpler than the state of Washington. The formulas and algorithms that are used for this are very complex compared to some states. So it is something that is misunderstood by a lot of people. So I'm hopeful that I can give you some terminology and some basic overview to help clear up some of those misunderstandings. So next slide, please. Calendars, just a brief overview. We do our fiscal calendar. Our fiscal year is September 1 to August 31st. Basically mimics the school year. So we start in September, we end the end of August. That's our fiscal year. We have various different employment contract years though. Some are what we call year-round employees or 260s, you might hear that term. Some of us have contract years that go from July through June, some go September through August. There's a whole variety of different contracts, a number of days that people work in those various contracts.
Can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
Is there any possible way we could get it on that screen? Because that would be kind of nice,
Okay.
if you don't wanna look at your.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'll look here and you can look
I'm
there.
on this.
Is this in Word docs?
Yeah,
Yes.
It was.
Yeah.
It is.
go to,
I
it's,
don't know, I'm in Word docs right now, I'm not seeing it. So what is it called?
Are you logged in?
First meeting.
Man,
So this is what I'm
meetings,
looking at right
doesn't
now.
log me
April
out.
8th,
Yep,
budget workshop, budget,
and then.
and then,
Board workshop?
If you go to
Let me log
featured,
out and log back in.
go to featured, it'll be under board workshop budget.
and then if you click on,
Hold on a second, let me log back in.
Yeah, I see all that. I see what you're seeing. Then what do we click on?
you can join the meeting, I think, or download.
Just view the meeting or download.
So we're under
I
budget
clicked-
workshop, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
I clicked,
Okay, and then we just
Join
got
it.
agenda.
Yes.
Kayla's gonna bring it up right here, if that would be, no, that's the second one, Kayla.
Dan made a couple of adjustments to it.
okay.
So
When I
what was
did
there?
it, I had joined.
Got it, I'll do that. Okay.
This is part two, that's, she's getting the other one, this is gonna be the second part.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
But, yeah, we made a couple, there was couple of small changes we made this morning. Dan, Gigi, and I met this morning, and we just kind of clarified things a little bit, cleaned up a couple of typos. Nothing that substantive, but, and then Kayla uploaded that, so maybe that's what the issue was. We'll get you there.
Board workshop. None of those are PowerPoints. They're all PDFs.
Yeah, just give me a second, guys, you can continue, but I'll have it up in less than 10 minutes.
Perfect.
You didn't really draw a very big crowd today.
No, I don't take that personally, I really don't. Like I said, just because I've chosen this as a career path doesn't mean other people find numbers as exciting as I do, so.
I do, I
it's-
promise.
Do you? Okay, well, I appreciate that.
Been working on them all day.
Oh,
Just nobody's too interested in this.
You think the school district is complicated?
This stuff, maybe while we're waiting, I'll give you just a frame of reference. I mentioned this to Gigi this morning. when I first started here, Dan sent me to, even though I had come from another district, I had worked in Skykomish for 5 years. I came here and Dan sent me to what's called the Business Managers Academy. It's put on by the ESD 189. It's been a long-going program where basically each year they bring in new business managers or whatever, and it's kind of a get you up to speed, to understand your position and all sorts of stuff. Basically, they cover some of this that we're looking at, and that is a 48-hour commitment. They spend you have 8 6-hour sessions that you do throughout the year to kind of help understand this stuff. So it's just, to give you a sense, it's a lot. It's a lot of information that as a business manager you're expected to know. So trying to get you kind of up to speed on just some of the real top level stuff. Okay, calendars, we talked about that. Let's move on to the next one, Caleb. So funds, we do what's called,
So hit refresh on your screen.
Refresh.
How do you do that? Just clicking.
that little circle.
I want the spinny thing.
I don't have.
And it's not there.
Well, we can just watch on here.
I have 2 presentations
You see it?
from. I will email it to everybody right now.
Next door, it's here.
Okay, so maybe we'll just point everybody's attention up here. So we have 5 funds that we deal with. We talk about fund accounting is how we run things. We have a general fund, that's the one that we'll talk about in most detail tonight and kind of contain our thoughts to that. It's Fund 10. It's used for all operations of the school. Staffing, material supplies and operating costs, everything to run the school district is under Fund 10 or general fund. Fund 20 is capital projects fund. This is where you do your large building projects, renovations, major repairs, etc. Debt service, purely as a vehicle for repayment of indebtedness. So as you borrow money and you have to make semi-annual payments, that's the fund of which those payments are funneled through to be repaid back to the lender. Associated student bodies, Fund 40. This is all areas again, which means our 2 elementaries, middle and high are all combined into Fund 40. And these are for student-directed co- and extracurricular activities are handled through ASB. And then last is Transportation Vehicle Fund. It is for purchase of yellow buses and or major repairs. There's a number of restrictions, but you can make repairs to buses if it meets certain criteria. Basically, if you have a complete engine failure or if you have something like that to a bus, there are some circumstances where transportation vehicle can be used for repair of the buses, not just purchase. But there's criteria that you have to fit. Anyway,
So what is the ongoing repairs covered?
there is a list. OSPI puts it out. You have to meet these certain criteria to be able to use Fund 90 for repair, quote unquote, repair of a bus. And if you don't meet those, then it has to go into general fund. So we have a program 99, which is in general fund, which is transportation, but you also have a Fund 90, which is transportation vehicle fund. So it can get a little confusing.
I see why they make it complicated.
Yeah.
So do you have any, because we tried to access that this year, do you have any more specificity as to what would qualify and what would not?
There is a form, Dan, I forgot to print the form and bring it with me, but there are certain very restrictive criteria that you can. We have not been able to qualify for them in our prior attempts. But under certain very selective circumstances, you can. All right, continuing on. Enrollment. Enrollment, we talk about enrollment a lot. It is the primary driver of your funding, okay? We want to differentiate between full-time equivalent, or FTE, and headcount, okay? So, full-time equivalent, I would define this as the percent of a school day that a student resides within the building, okay? Example, if the student was in the building 7 periods out of 7 periods for the day, they would be a 1.0 FTE, okay? We do have some students that is not their schedule. They are attending maybe 2 periods and they're leaving the building and going to Snow Isle or to RAP or to Running Start. So obviously they're not here the entire day. They don't count as a 1.0. They're counted as a fractional portion of the day of which they are physically residing in our buildings. Does that make sense to everybody? If they're here 7 of 7, they're 100% or a 1.0. If they're less than 7 of 7, they're something less than a 1.0. So we would use these factors primarily to calculate the amount of state revenues the district will receive. Again, state, not federal. And we also hear a term sometimes called AA, or annual average FTE. So in this case, you might have your count for the month of September, and then you have the count for the month of October. Well, your average is what you had in September, averaged with what you had in October, and the overall is your annual average through October. So we keep that updated month by month. As you add another count month, you have 10, you're counted September, you count enrollment for September through June. You do not count enrollment in July and August, obviously, because our kids are in July and August. So you have 10 count months, and as you go through that, you'll have the count for the month, but you also have the annual average through that month, from September through that month. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. You're going to take those individual counts, and just like you average anything else, add them all together and divide by the number of months, and that gets you your annual average. Head count. We talk about head count a lot, and head count, while it's an important metric, it doesn't factor into finance. Where it factors into is into planning and spatial calculations. Okay? So head count I've defined as the total number of students who spend all or some of their day within a building. You can think of it as like the max occupancy. Okay? At what point is the max number of people that you have in the building? That is your head count. Okay? Like we talked about. Probably going to be early in the day because you're going to have those students that are attending for a couple of periods, then they're leaving maybe for other programs. They're leaving for RAP, they're leaving for Snow Isle, they're leaving for Running Start. So, you know, Cameron's nodding her head over there. In the morning, would you say that's probably when the building is the most full, right? Yeah. The building is.
Second period, I would say, because a lot of people come in late.
Is that right? Second period?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the morning, yeah, that would make sense to me, is that's when the majority, your max occupancy or your head count, how many bodies, how many physical bodies do you have, okay? FTE says fractionally how much of the time is that student remaining in the building. Head count just says how many total bodies, how many human beings, how many students at a max point, what might we have in one building. When you talk about elementary at this level, your FTE and your head count are very close to each other because these students don't leave. Elementary students come to school, they stay in school all day, and they go home at the end of the day, all right? Middle, again, fairly close. At high is where it starts to get significantly different, especially in juniors and seniors. Okay, juniors and seniors, and we start to see Running Start and RAP, Snow Isle, and things like that starting to happen. So your head count of your juniors and seniors is going to be much higher than your FTE of juniors and seniors. That makes sense? Because they are departing. They're not remaining in the building all day. They are going to outside programs for a significant portion of their day. They're in our head count, but they're not in your FTE. Okay, questions? All right, continuing on. Prototypical school funding model, oh boy. All right, so a brief history. The prototypical school funding model, or PSFM, which we're going to call for short. Brief history. It started in 2010, so almost 15 years ago. It was established as the number of staff, or FTE, full-time equivalency, to be funded for what is called a prototypical size school, defined as follows. For an elementary school, they say a typical elementary school will have 400 FTE students. Okay, 400. We're greater than that here. Gold Bar is less than that. Okay, so we have one school that's above, one school that's below. Okay, what we do is we add the enrollment for both together and divide by 2, and that tells you the equivalent number of prototypical schools that you have. Okay, SES enrollment plus GBE enrollment divided by 2 for 2 schools gives you your average. Middle, 432. I'm not sure how they came up with such a weird number like 432, but 432 is a prototypical middle school. And at high school is 600. Okay, so 400, 432, and 600. Now to complicate things just a little bit further, they fund you based on grade span that is set up in the model. The grade span that's set up in the model is elementary is K through 6. And you've got middle, which is 7 and 8. In our district, elementary is K5 and middle is 6-8. Doesn't matter how the district chooses to split their grade spans. You're funded based on the criteria in the model. The criteria in the model, so in this case, 6th graders who are at our middle school are actually funded at the elementary rate because they are considered within the K6 realm. Everybody okay with that? You following me? What we choose to do, if we had a K4 and a 5-6 and a 7-8 and a 9-12, doesn't matter. They're going to fund those kids where they fit in grade-wise into the model, not where they fit in middle school, mid-high, high school, or whatever we decide to put together. We can come up with some, you know, hugely creative formula. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Note, prototypical school is a fixed theoretical school size that is used for modeling purposes. Funding is generated based on the grade level, reported rather than a school district's classifications. That's what I just said. We have a K-5, doesn't matter, they're gonna fund you K-6, elementary is K-6, middle is 7-8, high is 9-12. Doesn't matter, high is fine, because we have a 9-12 high, but where the things get a little blurry is between elementary and middle. You have this 6th grade that kinda, you know, moves itself over and is funded at the elementary when technically they're in the middle school for our district. So that creates a little bit of a distortion. Questions on that? Because this is a building block, a significant building block as we move forward. All right, next, we'll get something a little simpler.
So Dan, real quick, what is the difference in funding between sixth grades and, and middle school? Is there
Well,
a big difference in dollars that are allocated?
elementary, you do get funded at a little higher level than a middle school student, just from the standpoint is the feeling is there is more consumables, your MSOC amounts and things like that because of consumables. So an elementary funding will be a little bit higher than a secondary funding.
And that's particularly true in K-3.
Yep.
Where you hear the size 17 class size. Once we plug it into the formula, if we go over that, we get penalized from it. So we work hard to stay at that. And then, if you bring in the CTEs or a different one, we'll fund those at 23-1. I think it's 28-1. 17-1, 23-1, and 28-1.
Does everybody get that? Like, I don't think that's been discussed much as far as your class sizes and penalized and.
So there's a tool we can actually show you on the K-3, we meet that fine. We are fairly close on the CTE, we are low on the on the 28-1. I mean, we have class sizes at the middle school, high school are less than. And part of the complication of that, we'll get into that more in the next session, but part of the complication is you tend to hire in wholes versus, when I say whole, like a full teacher versus 0.4. Right. And there's a few examples where people have started like that, but when you're taking a look at your budget, that's when you start to look at that stuff and say, okay, what is our average class size in the middle school, what is it in the high school, what is it in CTE, and so that's where when we start to look at that, we talk about, okay, if you've got to move your budget to get within a parameter that we're trying to operate within, this is one of the things you look at. Is where are you staffed at based on the number of kids you have? And it's really all categories: classified, administrative, teaching, whatever. And this will start to make more sense as we go on. But I think that the best way to sort of look at what we're trying to do tonight is go to the kind of the broad picture, and then we're going to hone in on just one category from 6 to 7. That's the general fund, your operating budget. And we'll talk more specifically about it. So I guess to answer your question specifically, I don't have an exact number for you right now, but we will have that soon. As far as Dan was telling me today, there was a school district that's budgeting for 31-1, which is high. That's 31 kids in a class at high school is a lot of kids. We're less than, for sure. They've got a lot of budget ground to make.
Yep.
For however they got there, they've got a lot. You can't go and say, well, we'll try to spend 5% less electricity and make up any ground at all. It's people.
So, yeah, and it's not, and Caleb, jump back one slide for just a second, I want to mention. So Dave, just to kind of touch on your point, and again, not saying educationally right or wrong, simply the math. You have one class with 30 kids or two classes with 15. Two classes with 15, you're paying for 2 teachers versus 1 teacher. You have twice as much salary costs as you have one class with 30, 2 with 15. That's kind of the idea. They're having more kids.
Penalizing you for that extra teacher, though, right?
Say again?
They're penalizing you for having more kids per teacher.
At K3. At K3, kindergarten through 3rd grade, you have what's called a 17-to-1 ratio. So you want to stay there as a financial motivation to have your average class size be no greater than 17-to-1 at kindergarten through 3rd grade. We are currently at about 15.8.
But after that, after
High 15s?
like 4th grade?
4, 5,
throw
there
that
is,
out the window?
4, 5, there is no such, there is no financial
So
implications for having larger than that.
Even in middle school and high school also.
Middle school, high school.
We've made conscious decisions to try to keep, rather than have 30 kids packed in a classroom, to kind of keep the class sizes low.
Right. Yeah, not saying it's educationally correct, but that's just the math of
Got
it.
it.
Yeah.
Okay,
so.
thank you.
One last thing here before we leave prototypical school funding model in yellow. This is important to understand. Note that the prototypical school funding model is a funding model, not a staffing model. You might say, well, what does that mean? They fund you a certain number of positions based on an average size school. Okay, let's just say for simplicity, we have one elementary school and it's exactly 400 kids. It fits exactly the model, all right? It's exactly that. They are going to give you a certain number of staff for that school. Funding, they will give you funding for a certain number of staff. Let's say that in that particular circumstance, they fund you for 2 office staff. I'm just grabbing a number. Doesn't mean the district has to have 2 office staff. It means you'll receive enough funding for 2 office staff. So it is a funding, it provides money, but the district's decision is how they want to staff their buildings. They could staff it heavier, or they could staff it lighter, but it's a district decision. One district might say, oh my gosh, there's just no way we can do with less than 3 people in our front office. Okay, they're gonna staff above allocation. Or they might say, no, we're a small school, we can make do with 1 person. You know, Susie, she's fantastic and she can do everything, and you do it with 1, and so you're staffing less than allocation. But that's a district decision. The staffing is a district decision.
Question.
Yes.
So if they're funding for two teachers, right?
Or whatever,
How
yeah.
does salary affect that? I mean, you know,
Because the salary is embedded in there, so
so they're
there's
determining teacher salary?
the salary, you get a funded amount, which is based on your average state teacher salary. You would multiply that times the number of funded positions, times what's called your regionalization, gives you the total amount of money that you receive.
Regionalization.
Well, we'll talk about that in a little bit,
Yeah,
but
so Mercer Island's different than us, right?
it's basically, it's
I don't think
a,
they are.
no, it's a metric to reflect cost of living, essentially, is what it is. So, but we'll touch on that in just
But
hold
yeah, they
that
give us
thought.
money as much as they want to give us, and then it's
Right.
in our schedule for teacher salary,
Right.
it's our schedule.
So let's just say that average state teacher salary, I'll just pick a number, $80,000. Okay, let's just say it's $80,000, and that building is allocated for 2 teachers. You're gonna get $160,000 for teachers for this little simple example. But let's just say we don't need 2 teachers, we can make it with a teacher and a half, okay? So you've got $160,000 to work with, that's the amount of resources. What the district chooses to pay those teachers is subject to bargaining, subject to local bargaining. And depending on what the cost of the teacher and a half, that $160,000 might more than meet that total, might not meet that total, just depends. Or let's say you figure, we get funded for 2, but we need 2.5 teachers. Well, then there's gonna be a deficit. The amount you receive in funding, that $160 is not gonna be as much as you pay out. So there's gonna be a shortfall, which is gonna have to be backfilled with local levy, other federal resources and things like that. Okay. All right, I don't wanna get too deep, but those are good questions. Okay, next one, Caleb?
Sure make it complicated.
Well, yeah. Federal resources, just go, yeah, we get federal resources, we get IDEA, which is federal special education. That's the easiest way to remember it. Perkins, that's your VOC, or your federal CTE. Title I is called disadvantaged, is the term for that. Title II is called student achievement, and Title III is for English language learners. Those are the primary ones that we get. There are some smaller ones, but those are the ones of any real substance that the district gets on an annual basis. And we have gotten, I've been here 12 years, we've gotten all of those, all 12 years that I've been here. So they're pretty steady year after year. The amounts vary slightly from year to year. Sometimes it goes up a little bit, sometimes it goes down a little bit. But those 5, I don't think there has been a year that we have not gotten all 5 of those.
Ballpark, what's the percentage of our budget is provided by federal funds?
It's about 8%, 9%. It's not significant. Yeah, it's not really very significant.
I have a
It'll
question.
vary from year to year a little bit, depending on state resources. Yeah.
So I note that these programs each have a name, but I don't see here, standard student, no extra funding. Is that known as BAC? Do I have the acronym right?
Safety net?
No, I'm asking what's a standard student funding, what's the acronym for that?
Standard student funding, I'm not, where are you
Well, you
seeing
have
that?
federal, and you have IDEA, B. Perkins, Title I,
Right.
Title II, Title III.
That would be
Right.
state.
He's gonna go to state.
I'm gonna go to state in just a second.
Now
This is
I gotcha.
federal. Yeah, these are federals.
Okay.
Okay, so these are the federal ones.
States.
And federals are a little bit different. Like I said, IDEA, I'll give you an example. IDEA we use primarily for servicing for out-of-district, for special needs students, for out-of-district providers. So Mariana gave you a reply back. Almost every one of those warrants that you questioned is going to go under IDEAB. We're going to pay those vendors under IDEAB, special education. Perkins is a smaller one. It's typically only $10,000 to $12,000 a year. It's not very big. IDEAB is about $400,000 a year, give or take. Perkins is about 12-ish.
And it's all materials and supplies
Right.
for CTE.
Okay.
Title I's about 400, 390, 400, somewhere in that ballpark. Title II can vary a lot. It's typically in $50,000 to $60,000 a year. Title III is about 30, somewhere in that ballpark. Again, it depends. Certain years you have amounts that you can carry over to the next year. I don't want to get too deep here, but anyway. Next. Revenue state. Okay, so state is the primary driver of the money that we get, what we call apportionment. You'll hear that term a lot, apportionment, which is revenues provided to school districts. It's provided to us on the last working day of the month. We get paid once a month on the last working day of the month, and we get it deposited into our account at the county treasurer. State just electronically sends the money and it lands in our account. I don't have to do anything for it, okay? However, it's interesting to note that we don't get 1/12 of that amount every month. There's some months we get more, some months we get less. It varies. So here's your payment schedule, percentage of the annual amount each month. July, you get 12.5% of your annual amount in the month of July. August, you get 10%. So in the months of July and August, you're getting 22.5% of your total in 2 months. You might say, why is that? They're giving districts resources as they're starting the new school year. They're giving you a kind of a bump of resources as you're heading into September and getting your year started, okay? 9% months, those are kind of your average months. September, December, February, March, and April. Those are all 9% months. January's an 8.5, October's an 8, June's a 6, November and May are a 5. So we've talked about before our low point in fund balance when your savings account, if you want to make the analogy, gets to its lowest point, is in summer. And the reason being is you get 2 successive months of low apportionment. In May, you get 5%, and June followed immediately by 6%. You have 2 what we call low apportionment months back to back. And what that does is you're living off of fund balance because what you're spending for those months is greater than what you're receiving in apportionment for those months. So you're going into a deficit and you're living off of accumulated fund balance or savings. When you get to the end of June, you're at that low point, and then thankfully July comes around and you get 12.5%, and that really helps prop you back up. And then it's followed by August at 10%, and that helps you prop you up again. But you got to get through June. June is the low point. Okay? And that's because of those 2 low months in a row. Okay? That makes sense, everybody? They've tweaked these a little bit. These percentages have changed about 4 years ago.
I understand. But it doesn't make sense.
It's
All
like,
right.
I figured
Get
like
used to
the
it.
hardest stuff and.
Like I said, the rationale for the high in July and August is, again, to give you resources as you're heading into September. They're skinning money out of the other part of the year to give you more right at the end of the year.
You know, if that were true, they're giving us resources to head into the new year, then why are you running a deficit in May and June that you gotta pay that July money back? So you're just paying back the debt. So
Right,
it doesn't
right.
make sense. Those logic doesn't pan out.
It
Well-
No doubt has something to do with the state's cash flow. They're working.
Well, and it's no coincidence that November and May, your 2 lowest months, are the months immediately following your tax collections. Okay? Fall tax collection, spring tax collection. So the thought is, you've collected a lot of tax resources, your fund balance has gone up, and now you're gonna have a couple low months, and you're gonna use that money to help cover the shortfalls that you have. So there's a method to it.
So are we incurring debt from May and June?
No, what you want to do is that's why we do this cash flow analysis to say, how much money do we think we'll have in our fund in those months? And every month I give you that. We'll go through that in more detail this month now that you have some of this information.
We don't have debt service.
Yep. All right, next slide, please. Revenue state continued. We have purpose. You go into what's general purpose versus special purpose. And to make it more complicated, special education gets both, okay? Special education students are, first of all, they are basic ed students, so they get general apportionment. But they're also special ed students, in which they get special resources over and above. Special ed has 2 revenue codes, 3121 and 4121. 3121 is general, 4121 is special, but those students receive monies in both of those accounts. Okay? Categorical funding is another thing we hear about. You hear us talk about LAP, or Learning Assistance Program, a lot. It's been a huge benefit to this district and many districts. LAP is broken into two pieces. You have regular LAP and you have high poverty LAP. District, currently all 4 of our buildings qualify for both of these, regular LAP, high poverty LAP, have for several years. Transitional Bilingual Program, or also known as TVIP, is for our English language learners. That amount in that has increased steadily. Again, it's based on the number of students that are identified as having English as a second language. So the amount of resources, when I first started here 10 years ago, I would say our amount of TVIP has doubled in the past decade. Probably gone from 200,000 to close to 400,000 now, because again, it's tied to the identified student. And highly capable, which is smaller, it's about $75,000 a year. Again, it's tied to students who test and are determined to be in a gifted program. Pilot grants are one-time state resources. You might put in a grant for those and you get some one-time money. So those will vary from year to year. Next. Local. So federal, state, now local, third piece. Local. Local is broken into two pieces, non-tax and tax. Non-tax first. Non-tax primarily would be fees. Fees could be things like class fees. Okay, we don't have a lot of those. Those have gone down over the years. 10 years ago, we used to have a lot more class fees than we do now, but class fees would be an example. Child nutrition would be an excellent example for those that are paid families. They're making payments. Those are local non-tax collections. And then we also have gifts, grants, and donations. Okay, we've had a number of those this year. We've been lucky to find some benevolent organizations that have given us money. But those will all be local non-tax receipts. Next slide. And then you get into tax. So tax obviously is your levies. Your levies are again a voted measure. You must get 50% plus 1 vote for passage. Typically they are 4 years in duration. They can be shorter, but typically they're 4 years. And property tax. It's defined as the lesser of the voter approved amount of $202.50 per thousand of AV or per pupil limit. Okay, I know that's a lot, but assessed valuation, sorry, assessed valuation. Note, our target estimate is $1.50, okay? So back a little bit of history. Back when they did the McCleary settle up in 2018, for 1 year, the rate was $1.50 per thousand. The next year, the state changed it to $2.50 per thousand, and it has remained at $2, not to exceed $2.50 per thousand. Our district, our board has consciously made a decision to stay at or very close to an estimated rate of $1.50 per thousand. Okay, so that's an important distinction. $1.50 for us, even though up to $2.50 is permissible. State, by law, you can do up to $2.50. And they're not saying right or wrong, but there are a number of districts that have crossed that $1.50 threshold, and they're into that $2 or approaching $2 even or over $2 threshold now.
But it has to be approved by the voter.
Yes, the lesser of the voter approved amount or the per pupil. I won't get into the per pupil. Gets really confusing. Enrichment. This has to be used for enrichment. When this first came out, they made this thing that we have to do what's called sub-fund. Is local resources have to be put into what's called, we talked about general fund, Fund 10. There's actually called, what's a component of that called sub-fund, which is sub-fund 1 under 10, where we have to put all of our resources and all of our expenditures related to local tax collections. And we have to demonstrate that this is for enrichment. Enrichment would be defined as, it's been very difficult for the state ever to get a concrete definition, but enrichment is everything that the state doesn't pay for. That's about the best description we've ever gotten from them. It's very loose, but an example might be a district says, okay, enrichment, we're going to offer French, and we're going to hire a French teacher to have a second foreign language option. That would clearly be an enrichment, okay? Something the district didn't have before. We've added a second foreign language. We've hired a teacher to do that. Very clear, okay? Excuse me. Extracurricular is enrichment. Okay, extracurricular clearly fits the definition of enrichment. So there are some things that are very cut and dry, but there are others that are a little more gray as far as that. But we have to, every year I have to categorize things that way, and we are audited every year to make sure that we are coding things to what's called sub-fund under enrichment for local levies.
What percentage of our general fund is paid by local revenue?
So we've got, our levy this year is about just short of $4.4 million, $4,368,000,
About 10%.
about 10, give or take.
And to give you, before, prior to the fix, McCleary was about 16, 18%. So it had grown to be too big of a part of the budget. That's one of the reasons why they did the fix. And so I guess I would just make a comment, you know, staying at 150, I think is a good thing. I just, you know, I don't, you guys are the board to decide. But, you know, I just think that that's been something that we can feel good about.
And it's not something that we're gonna need to make a decision on.
So the fifth is 8, and this is 10, so
Mhm.
the.
State is the vast.
82% is the
80
state.
plus, yeah,
But even
80% is
10%,
gonna be.
you can see if we didn't have the levy, how difficult it would be.
And that was the challenge for a lot of districts when they made this levy swap and they said that you can't exceed $1.50. There were some districts that really came out on kind of the short end of that thing. Yes, you got more state resources, but your levy was capped at so much less than you had collected previously that there were some winners and losers in that change. So, next slide. Oh, and then it's calendar year based. Taxes are always calendar year based. Okay, they're January through December. They're not fiscal year based. Next. Bonds. And I know we talked about changing the slide, but I thought since we used LGO for the roof at the middle school, I thought it was, yeah, let's keep the middle school picture there. So, bonds, non-voted debt and voted debt, okay? Non-voted debt are an LGO, which is called a limited general obligation bond, which we have used a number of times, one of which to replace the middle school roof. That's a picture of our middle school, and to replace that roof, we used this funding mechanism.
Part of the middle school.
Part of the middle school roof, yes. We use this funding mechanism to do that in two stages. We did part 1, part 2. They're typically shorter in duration, 10 years or less. They can be used for renovations and repairs, but they cannot be used for new construction. That is very important. You cannot just go out and borrow money without voter approval to build a new building.
We borrowed till loan.
So we just
LGO
go out and borrow it without voter approval?
Correct. Non-voted debt, up to there's certain thresholds. You just can't go and borrow forever. There are thresholds as far as how much you can borrow. Okay, but yes, it is non-voted, does not require a vote of the public. And like I said, it's typically, again, shorter duration, 10 years or less. It can be used primarily renovations, repairs, not new construction. And the middle school roof replacement was an excellent example of how we've used that funding module, that vehicle in our district.
So would this include like bus repairs?
Never done any LGOs for buses, but you could, if you were, let's say that you were really short. Some districts have a transportation vehicle levy where they collect tax money for buses specifically, but
You could, I think, but we have never done.
we have never had to.
We've kept our buses on the depreciation schedule, so it's a whole different deal, but every month for buses that are either 0 to 8 years, they were small buses, or large buses 0 to 13 years, we get depreciation money on a monthly basis that's paid in August. So typically every year we'll order 2 buses. And so far that's been sufficient to keep us going.
Yep.
Big ticket item.
They're a huge ticket item, and you don't have to go out and say, you know, if you have massive growth, and that may be a problem, or you all of a sudden you've got, gosh, we need 6 buses rather than 2, then you might have to think about something like that. But today, we manage this well. You know, it's something you don't ever hear about, because it's being taken care of as it comes in. And so in August, we probably already ordered the buses, or we're getting ready.
They were paid and they were in the last warrant run. Yeah, 2 buses, paid for 2 buses.
And so then we will, you know, they'll be delivered at some point once they're built, because they're not built yet. And so if you want canners on them or whatever you put on, we look at our account and see where we're at. But it's, you never hear about it because it's going fine.
Good. How long do those buses last?
Different depreciation schedule depending on the type of bus that it is, or I'll use a generic term, short bus versus long bus. Depreciation schedule is different. I think it's 7 years on a large bus and 5 on a shorter, I believe.
7 and 13.
Oh, it's 7 and
It's
13,
8
okay.
and 13.
8
8 on
and
a
13,
small
okay.
one, 13 on a big one.
Okay.
But I think the question was, how long do they last?
Yeah.
So not every one of our buses is on a depreciation schedule. So some of them are older than 13.
Have gone off the schedule.
Oh, they've
That's-
fallen off the depreciation.
So we're not
Then
getting money for
restricted
them,
on
we're still
maintenance.
using them. Yes.
Correct, they're not generating any reimbursement
How many do we have?
That's Charlie.
I can, yeah, I'll pull the list, we've got it, and, you know, it's something, it's part of that whole equipment replacement schedule. One of those tabs is all of the buses, and so you can see where they are in it. We need to probably put that on the board docs, so you can access it whenever you have a question.
Yeah,
Is that
Charlie
something we
Charlie
can
maintains that
buy
in
from
his
the
department.
districts that are like losing students and stuff? Yeah.
Well, the maintenance on it would be worth probably too much.
Well, no, I mean, 'cause a lot of the districts are, they're closing schools and stuff, so I don't know if they're like that.
You know, that, I think what you're talking about, Gigi, is that it's kind of a new phenomenon. It hasn't happened. We've
Yeah.
got this, so many of them, the big districts especially. I'm still trying to figure out how to airlift a school from Bellevue here. You know, they're closing brand new ones, and, well, you see what we're using.
Some of the larger districts you contract out, they don't own their buses, they contract out to Durham or somebody like that, that does the transport for them on a contract basis, so. And voted debt, 60%, again, we just went through this in February, we sent a voted issue out there to pass, would have required 60%, yes. Typically, long-term, 20 years or greater in duration, and they're used to fund primarily new building projects. Because again, non-voted cannot be used for new construction, so you use voted for new construction.
Just a comment on that. Washington's one of the most restrictive states on this. You know, it's, we went down to Florida, the board directors, I went into one in Kansas, a very conservative state. Theirs is 50% plus one. Many are. Washington is 60%. The most restrictive state is Idaho, which is 2/3, 66%.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we pass anything ever, but
Yeah, they're very restricted.
But you said, what was the state that was only 51?
Kansas, but many are like that. I've seen a map where it shows it, and many are like that.
Really?
Yeah, we're very restricted here.
I wonder how we got those.
I don't know. I think it goes back, if you go back decades, to when you had a few people that owned a lot of the property. You know, they didn't want, it wasn't really fair to have the masses voting on a few people that were the main property owners.
Right.
Because the main people that foreclosed on those properties, and we're talking back around 1920, 1910, the Enabling Act that came into place, much of that property is now what we call DNR property, that we harvest that land. It's all tied together, but it didn't seem fair at the time to have, you know, all of the people voting on a few of the main property owners paying all the taxes. People just don't change with time. That's really what it comes down to. It's not that way anymore.
All right, next slide, Phil. Okay, so at this point, we're very early in the overall budgeting, and we're gonna get into more details here at the next session. But right now, we are at 83% salaries of our total budget. That pie reflects our total budget, of which approximately 83% is for salaries and benefits or staff costs. 17% would be for materials, supplies, and operating costs, or you heard the term MSOC a lot, 17%. How does that compare to the statewide average? Very close. Statewide average is in the low 80, it's about 82 to 18, 82.5 to 17.5. So we're within about 0.5% of what the average statewide is for salaries and benefits and material supplies operating costs. Next page. Fund balance, you'll hear this a lot. What's our fund balance? What's our fund balance? It's kind of akin to, you can think of your savings account or what's left over. Basically, the accounting equation for this is assets minus liabilities equals owner's equity. Assets is what you own, things of value, okay? Less your liabilities, things you owe to others, gives you what's left over. Your owner's equity, your fund balance. We call it fund balance in public schools. Currently, what's on policy is a minimum fund balance of 4% of prior year's expenditures, okay? So that means we take the expenditures from the prior year's budget, we multiply by 4%, and we say, okay, for the upcoming year, our target would be whatever that number is. For us, that number would, 4% would be about $1.6 million, give or take, okay? We have talked at the last meeting of, and we'll get into this more at the next session, as far as having an intermediate goal of getting to 1 million, having a target of 1 million this next year, with a 2-year goal of getting back to the 4%. Mike, I believe is kind of how you phrased it. So anyway, but that's what we call fund balance. Basically, our assets minus our liabilities equals what's left over, owner's equity or fund balance.
Real quick, the goal was to get to that million in reserve, is that what you were just talking about?
For this upcoming year, yes, which is
Where-
less than 4%.
Okay, where are we right now? How far are we from that?
Well, again, it varies from month to month. Like I said, we're coming into,
We're a ways away if you look at the budget.
Yeah.
Well, and this, the
We have
next,
more to do.
well, it's gonna grow, it's gonna rise, so it's gonna go up there. I give you that graph every month, and it's got this kind of, this wave kind of to it.
Yep.
And it ties in. Your high points are where you have your tax collection, so you have a high point in fall,
Got it.
you have a high point in spring, and then it goes into a low point. So, you know, where we're at right now, yes, we kind of say where we're at versus where we'd like to be, but it's gonna ebb and flow significantly. We're coming into a period where it's gonna rise, then it's gonna start to fall, and then it's gonna rise again at the end. Because again, you're gonna get a lot of money in July and August, so you're gonna hit low months. You're gonna have a high month in April because of your tax collections, then you're gonna have a low apportionment month, you're gonna have another low apportionment month, then you're gonna have a 10%, a 12.5% month, and a 10% month, so it's gonna kind of do this kind of thing, so it's.
So
it's
really,
curve.
we'll get into this in a much deeper dive in the next section. There's some documents that we sent out that kind of touch on this a little bit. But what we're really talking about is ending in August of 2025 with $1 million.
With $1 million.
That's what we're talking about. Okay? Because it's, you take the ending fund balance and divide it by, to get the 4%. It's just, you know,
Yep.
in each board meeting, when you look at the the cash flow, you can see how it goes up and down in months. You can follow, there's probably 7 or 8 years, I think, that are on that one spreadsheet. Or not a spreadsheet, but that one
Graph.
particular graph.
Right.
And it shows you how it just is all over.
The pattern is very predictable. The only thing is the height, the height of how high or low that line is looks at your overall balance. So the overall balance has decreased over the last few years, but the trending is pretty predictable. Again, high point in November, it's gonna drop down, you have a high point again in April, it's gonna hit its lowest point in June, and then it's gonna tick back up in July and August. So the curvature of the line is pretty predictable, it's just exact numbers where that ends up.
So on the fund balance, I know previously we had to predict and send that into the state, correct?
We still do a
That's the
we still do a 4-year, yep.
For your forecast. So in our 4-year forecast, how close are we in our, before we were worried that there could be a potential of a penalty or there, you know, the state could look a little closer.
Right.
I don't think it's any more than the best planning tool that you can do, because I've told Dan privately that, well, not privately, but in our whole meetings on budgets, that every year to a certain degree in a district our size, with where we're located, and the pressure on the fund balance, because there's a redo almost every year, to a certain degree. It's, you know, if you think about it this way, payroll every month is $2,600,000. You're talking about running a business, you don't have much choice in the matter. I mean, if it was my private business, I'd run it way differently.
Sure.
But if you had payroll that's 2.6 million and you have $1 million in the bank, that doesn't sound like a very good plan. Okay? It's just not how you run a business. And so sometimes you really have stuff going both ways. But that's how this works. And if we got to a point where some significant things would have to change for us ever to get to being able to have 1 month's payroll in the bank. I mean, steadily, not, you know, we'll touch it at times, but to have it there steady.
So my kind of maybe different take on your question is, yes, you know, obviously we missed our enrollment goals significantly this year. Next year, we're budgeting very conservatively at what our average is for this year for next year. So I think that's a very conservative number. The most recent 195F was built on that higher number, so those numbers are gonna need to be skinny down. So I'm not sure how meaningful the current 195F that's out there is. But anyway, it's a good segue to my next slide. Go ahead and hit the next slide. I know we're running up against time. Dan, go ahead. Did you
Well,
want to say something?
and we built, you know, we typically, every year, have been very conservative. Last year, we built for some growth. There were signs that it could happen. And, you know, this year, right now, we have 25 more kids maybe even a few more than that, because today was count for April, and I know there've been more kids coming in. We have 25 more kids than we started the year with, and so we've grown over the course of the year. But when we looked at all the houses being built, we looked at all the young kids in those homes, not knowing exactly what was gonna happen, we forecasted a little more, I guess liberally is the correct word.
It was
Yeah.
Aubrey's fault.
Well, I mean, yeah, if you looked at the roll-up straight from there, we figured, at the rate we were going in this school, we figured we'd have 700 kids. We don't have 700 kids.
No, county's gonna come on the way.
We have about, like next year, the last class under 100 is leaving this year. And so in 5th grade here next year, it's scheduled to be 115. And that's among 4 teachers. That's pretty high, you know. So but my recommendation, when we'll talk about this a little bit, well, how do we plan for this then when you're trying to level out your budget? And that's what we'll end up talking about the next time. What are our options? Where are some places where the forecast might end up better? We just don't know the information yet. And what are some things that we still need to do that we need to consider and offset? And that's what we'll dig into during the next session.
How many slides do you have left?
Last one, then we'll be good. So you'll hear, these are just kind of FYI stuff. There are various reports that we're required to submit OSPI on an annual basis, and/or tools. So you'll hear some of this stuff, so just so you know the terminology. The first one, you can see the first letter, which I've indicated in red, is typically an F. F stands for fiscal. So when you see an OSPI report that's an F, whatever it is, it's a fiscal report, okay? Comes out of my office. Or an S report would be a staffing report. So an S275 is a staffing report, and 275 is the number of the report, but it's under staffing, okay? So we're gonna talk about this next hour, but the F203, that's the funding calculation tool. Developed once the state budget is approved, it's estimated to be next week, the week of the 15th. The F195, that's your budget, okay? The technical term for the school's budget is the F195. And it's due by the 31st of August each year, and it's in its simplest form, it is an authority to expend. You were basically saying we are giving authority to expend up to a certain amount, not to exceed, but up to a certain amount. In its simplest form, that's what the budget is. It's authority to expend, okay? What Mike talked about before, the F195F, the F at the end is for a 4-year outlook. So it's a 4-year budget outlook. The F200, if we have to do those, we've done those. That's what's called a budget extension. In your F195, you have a maximum amount that you can expend. If you anticipate you're going to exceed that number, you have to do what's called a formal budget extension, or an F200. We have had to do those several times over the last decade. And then last, the S275, again, S is a staffing report. It basically is a report that we make to the state because we talked about average state teacher salary. That's how they get the information for average state teacher salary. We report the salaries of all of our staff. They do that from every 295 districts statewide, and they're able to come up with an average state teacher salary based on the information submitted from all the districts.
Granular, we're getting
Very, very.
there. So you compare a 3rd grade teacher here with another district.
Yeah, there's all kinds of different metrics that they put out as far as the S275 report, and you can look at those things and so forth. But that's the primary purpose of that, is to get up that average state teacher salary, because that's a key funding metric.
What would be the highest paid school district
As far as
Probably Everett.
Everett would be.
in Everett?
Everett, yes. Everett has contract language in their teacher's agreement that was put in, I don't know, many, many years ago, that says, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, it says that their teachers will be the highest paid in the state. So whatever another district makes, they will make at least $1 more.
The gate was locked, that's why.
The gate,
Wow.
Yeah.
and that's my presentation for the first.
Okay.
Made it with 6 minutes
Very
to
good. I
go, so
appreciate
you can
that.
have a bathroom break
You
before we
guys
go to the
want a
next.
break, you got it.
Thanks for putting that together.
You bet.
I gotta stretch my legs.
Thank
Again,
you
I
for
realize this is a
calling,
lot.
calling.
Happy to have, individual meetings with you to answer more questions.
Any smells?
She drew the short straw.
Oh, I just got your email, it just like popped up right
record reflect that all elected board members are present, and we'll be on a second, and our student rep is here also, and flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Were there changes to the agenda?
Yeah, just one deletion. We were gonna have Crystal Kelly report out on the Trade Up field trip to the fairgrounds, where they visited with a number of the different trade organizations, unions, and various things, and she couldn't, it didn't have to blank, so she's gonna be here tonight. We'll move that presentation to the business meeting this week.
So can I get a motion to accept the deletion of one item on the agenda?
Motion to accept the deletion of one item on the agenda.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. That is done. So, public comments, and you'll all be happy to know that we shortened our little script. We don't have, I don't think, any questions from last time that needed to be answered. So our board has adopted policy procedure 1400, which is available on our website. If you would like to speak, we have a sign-in sheet by the door. Reminders, total time allowed is 30 minutes. Each speaker has a maximum of 3. Public comment period is the only time that the public is recognized to speak. It's not a time for dialogue between the board and the public, but rather an opportunity for the board to listen to individuals on educational issues, and board members are encouraged to listen attentively. Board chair or superintendent might ask the speaker to clarify a question or respond to a specific comment. But if you have a specific question or issue that you would like the district to follow up on, please let us know and someone will contact you within 72 hours. Finally, please remember that your words have impact, and you, not the school district, are responsible for your words, and we ask that you help us model for our students what a respectful and inclusive community looks and sounds like. Did you find it?
Taylor?
That was noticeably short.
And I told you that was okay. Whitney?
Oh, Kayla, it says you're muted on the screen.
Yes, that is Zoom for Charlie,
Um,
and he's not in there yet.
Am I good to go?
You're good to go.
Okay. So I just want to start out with a little quote that I read, and it says, "An environment that is not safe to disagree in is not an environment focused on growth, it is an environment focused on control." I feel like growth is a serious topic that needs to be addressed within the Sultan School District. At this point, some of the injustices I've seen done to families in the district is quite appalling as a parent and an educational leader within our community. Retaliation should not be the first step in coexisting with parents and members of the community. Everyone should be met with support and an open mind. Anyone who speaks at these meetings, their voices should always be heard, and serious reflection should be done from the board before responding. And without the board responding in negative or in snide attacking fashion, which I feel like is done sometimes. Within our industry of education and in being in administrative roles, self-reflection I know at times can be hard, and sometimes we always feel that our policies are right, our decisions are right, our teachers are right, our choices are right as owners, managers, district officials. We're right all the time, but that's not the case. I feel like when you open your mind up to reflecting and handling situations in a more appropriate, thought-out fashion without the need to always be right, it leaves you less room for ridicule, judgment, backlash from the community, and your parent partnerships. Reflection is hard though, because in most cases it means you are wrong and you need to make some change. But seeing the positive in outcome is more meaningful than the need to be right all the time. A partnership takes more than the administration or like-minded individuals. A partnership takes everyone working together with hopeful resolve and resolution at the end, or positive outcome, whether we agree or agree to disagree. Everything done at the district level needs to be done with the children's best interests in mind, the teachers' best interests in mind, and right now I feel like we are far from supporting our students and faculty. I do feel like some people are making strides, but I just feel like everyone needs to come together a little bit more for the students, faculty, and parents. I think sometimes the board and district officials forget that with every family that's pushed out of the district or belittled and argued with, they are your votes that you're losing. And that will never change unless these people move out of this town, parents, community. They are your voters regardless if their kids attend the schools or not. The more people and families you upset within the community, the less votes you will get on any ballot. I would like that taken into consideration before more poor choices are made here. I would hope for positive resolve and more positive push within the district. I feel that anyone that has been wronged in the past should be reached out to by the board directly and had a meeting with only the board is my request. So you guys are actually hearing what's happening firsthand, and if you're not in the privy of what's happened in some situations, you're hearing directly from the people that have been impacted and they're able to talk to you directly. Your community is who will support you or not. Sitting at these desks does not make a vote pass. Your impact on the community does. I always tell my management teams respect is earned, it's not given, and I stand by that on a daily basis, no matter where any of my managers are in their career, and I feel like the same goes here. So I would like to see positive growth within the district. I just hope more board members step forward in achieving the same thing. I do think, unfortunately, that does mean some change needs to happen. I just hope for our kids, like, that's the forefront, and that's the goal that we're trying to achieve here, and for our teachers too. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cameron.
Okay, that's me. Hi, my name's Cameron Skeet. I'm a junior at the high school, and I'm here to talk about some things going on at the high school right now. I have a lot of sports, so sorry, bear with me. Some sports going on. Last week we had softball. They only had one game last week because their other ones kind of got canceled from being rained out. Fields kind of dictate with weather. So on Tuesday they played LaConner and beat them 19-4, which is amazing. So proud of them. Go ladies, so proud. Go, go. And then for baseball, on Monday, they had a game against Evergreen and beat them 4-0. And then they had another game Tuesday where they also played LaConner and beat them 13-12. And then had a game Thursday, baseball as well. And then they played and beat Friday Harbor 17-3 on a really rainy day. So I was really proud of them for kind of pushing through, especially with our field also not that great and being able to play basically in mud. So I'm proud of them there. And then today, baseball played Coopville away and beat them 9-4. It's a big accomplishment there. I know it's a lot of baseball, but that's softball's kind of like quite a few of the games are getting canceled because of weather. So I will update you more on when I find out more about today, how they went today. And now clubs. Right now all I kind of have for clubs is HOSA. Their annual blood drive is happening April 12th from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Fulton High School. So I highly recommend you all, if you can, donate, because it's really a great opportunity for our kids to learn, especially the ones involved in it, as well as a great way to give back to your community and give back and be able to save a life. Yeah, that's all I got.
Can I ask real quick on the blood drive, since we have the person here, do we need to register online in order to donate?
Yes, you do. There's a QR code and a link available online, and I can send it to you privately if you want it to.
Is it on the district website?
I don't think it's on the district website, but I can get that to Kayla.
It's on one of our social, the student-led social media pages, from our ASB pages, our HOSA pages, of course,
Because we have some adults probably.
and then they have a Facebook page too. HOSA does.
All right, yeah, share it with us and we'll see.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Cameron. Next we have board comments. This is just an opportunity for each board member to make a comment if they so choose to do so. Mike, anything that's on mind or anything you want to bring up?
No, thank you. I'll pass this time.
Marianne?
Yeah, I'd like to remind everyone that the Sky Valley Chamber of Commerce annual fundraising dinner auction is this Saturday, April 13th from 5:30 to 9 p.m. at the Startup Event Center, and there's still a few tickets left. If you go to the Sky Valley Chamber website, you can purchase your tickets online. I am also reminding people that the plant sale at SHS with Mr. Jared over here, May 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Do we have no? Not May 3rd, 4th, and 5th.
Just the 3rd and the 4th.
Just the 3rd and the 4th, thank you. Before Mother's Day, and do we have a price?
Price?
A price for baskets and planks?
Everything's different price.
A range, a price range?
Well, the plants are gonna normally about $5 a piece.
Okay.
And the hanging baskets, which the wood shop makes the cedar baskets, and then the plant goes in there, so they're, right now they're about 65. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So $5 to $65, and that's all I have. Thank you, Jared.
You don't get a hold me to that price.
I'm not. I said a range.
I do not have anything.
I just wanted to bring up the healthy survey workshop that we did last week, seems like forever ago. Those that were able to attend, thank you very much, appreciate it. There, I think in the packet, there is the actual contact information. The Healthy Survey is led by the State Health Department in partnership with OSPI and HCA. So they're the ones to contact if you have questions about it itself, not the Snohomish County person that I've seen listed. And we have the email for the principal investigator, so if anyone is interested in questions that they might want to see on the next survey, there's a link that you can go and look at actually the questions that are on it before submitting any possible questions. Dave. Okay. That was quick and easy. Approval of HOSA travel request. Hi.
Hello, everybody, long time no see. My name is Brandy Varnell and I teach health sciences at Sultan High School. Just prior to this board meeting, I sent you a letter, formal request for some action items, one specifically to approve the overnight travel of these 12 young ladies to nationals, as well as we are asking the district to provide meals and ground transportation for them during this trip. I did provide for you in this letter a breakdown of what ground transportation may cost based on two ground transportation services, both Lyft and Uber. They were both, it's like a wash, it's a $10 difference between either of them. For these 12 competitors and 2 chaperones that will be going, and the places we would definitely need to go. So I gave that breakdown for you, as well as the potential cost for meals. I took that cost for meals literally from their state competition. This national competition is exactly the same amount of time, like literally from start to finish. So it would be the same amount of meals for this national competition as it was for state. For a total of $3,340, that's ground transportation for 14 and meals. I also provided you with, we know that this trip is going to cost quite a bit of money, and with a breakdown of what we are assuming we need to make, I can give you an update as of the day before yesterday, when the Sultan Education Foundation reached out to me. We've already received almost $3,000 in donation. This is before our event. So we are feeling pretty good about people wanting to come and participate in this event. The estimate I gave you is potential with a full roster of players. With that, this is also, it's an expensive trip. So normally where we don't ask parents to contribute much to like this kind of academic thing, I am going to ask that each parent contributes $125 to this trip, just to offset the cost of airfare and hotel stay. Though, to be really frank, I definitely know there will be a couple people on my team where that's not going to be feasible for their families. That's why we're doing this big fundraising effort. That being said, I gave you an estimate of what we're looking at possibly bringing in, which is well over that $500 donation threshold. And then with the addition of any community donations, sponsorships, etc., what it may look at. And this is my best educated guess, and I really educated or educated, I really guessed on the low side. I was really conservative. Also gave you a copy of our flyer that's gone out, social media. We'll have hard copy of those going out. Hey, if you want to come play cornhole, I know a really great time you can do it. And then I did send to you, just because I felt like you need to really get to know these competitors, a breakdown of each student and their accomplishments. So I hope you had a chance to look at that. So what I'm asking for today is approval for our overnight trip, a commitment from the district to pay for meals and ground transportation, knowing that we may be coming with a very large sum of money coming soon for approval to accept it. I would hate to grab it and have you not go, or have these two groups collected and then go, oh, well, we're not going to accept that much money, because I need that much money to take these kids to nationals. And then in the event of a shortfall, that you would be open to a discussion and an approval if feasible. I know what the budget looks like if there's a significant deficit, which I don't feel there will be. But I just want to throw that out there, because if I'm $500 short, I'm going to be right back here. And I will be that squeaky wheel, because these kids deserve this. If I could take it all from my pocket, I would, but I can't. So,
Does anyone have questions? Karen? Mike?
No.
Maureen? Isaac?
No.
Excellent job.
thank you.
So let's do one where we approve overnight travel. The second one would be approval of the 3340. And then I think we said last time, Dan, that we don't have to do an approval of the funds until we can say you can get them, and then you get approval once you get them. Okay.
Did you say there's a $500 limit threshold?
Uh,
What is that?
right-
I don't read that in.
No, right now, we have to have approval to accept a donation from an outside source of greater than $500.
It's mostly a
Oh,
tool
that's
to
right.
make sure that
Yeah.
the board knows what's going on.
Yeah, so I'm just being really the squeaky wheel about letting you know that a large sum of money is coming.
So can I get a motion to approve overnight travel for HOSA's national competition?
Yeah, it's the anatomy competition.
I make a motion to approve overnight travel for HOSA anatomy competition.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's approved. Can I get a motion to, let's see, provide $3,340 to HOSA for ground transportation and meals?
Motion to approve 3340 for ground transportation and meals for HOSA.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
I just have a request.
Absolutely.
Would you share, you and I were having a conversation, I think it's important that everybody talk again, so.
I will share anytime you ask me to, and I'll try to be quick. As you know, 6 of our seniors in health sciences right now have recently found out that they have been accepted to University of Washington, Seattle. This is a really competitive school to get into, all in a pre-med or pre-nursing track. One of the very exciting things that I have to share with you I got a phone call over spring break. It was actually a FaceTime call from one of my students. She has completed will be completing her associate's degree upon graduation, and I had the absolute privilege of writing her a letter of recommendation for entry into the UW nursing program Seattle, which is extremely competitive. Most people go in, you do 2 years of prereqs, and then you apply in. Usually, your 3rd year at UW. Our student, Kiana Kiprios, was accepted coming straight out of high school directly into their nursing program. This is phenomenal that she was accepted. She's 18 years old. I'm so proud of her. I just was crying in the car. Yeah, so congratulations to Kiana.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Some of our students here that were accepted to University of Washington, the first one on your screen was Peyton Schlicker. She is our HOSA president of 2 years, and you can see all the incredible awards that she's won. She would like to be a thoracic physician and surgeon, and she's well on her way to doing that. Has been just an incredible leader. Grace Plummer has been our HOSA vice president for 2 years, and she also has a wealth of state awards behind her. So she wants to be an emergency physician, possibly in sports medicine. And then Camden Fajardo, also accepted to University of Washington, functioned as our social media manager and has one of the most diverse state competition awards of all my students. Her plan is to be a physician, orthopedic surgeon with specializing in orthopedic trauma. She also works at Summit as a rehab assistant, so was hired before she graduated to do that. Her and Grace Plummer both. So.
She worked on my knee.
She's amazing. This is Jackie Quevedo, my other senior. She has been accepted to Western, where she would like to go and study to be a registered nurse. Jackie is one of the most sensitive, empathetic young ladies I have ever met, and has just a phenomenal brain for medicine and anatomy. So very, very proud of her as well. And then I know you've seen them all. I have juniors, I have sophomores, and one freshman on this team. So all of them doing amazing things.
Sandra, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think we're good with everything.
Thank you.
Do we have Charlie for approval of Jim Moore?
He is here to answer any questions you might have. Charlie, can you hear us? He's not here. He's not here. So he was just on standby. I can handle this. Dan can handle part of it. This is really follow-up to the weather problem that we had back in January, where we had some pipes break at Gold Bar, a couple of different places at the high school. This is focused on the gym floor. And so I think I read in some emails today that the adjuster is just getting all of the so many schools were impacted, they're just getting the whole thing figured out. But the question that we had, this gym floor that's in there right now is the original when the building was built. And so I think you can sand them up to 3 times, possibly 4, it just depends on some circumstances. And so and that goes back to the mid-80s when the building was built. And we know of 2 sanders, and so the question really was, are they gonna replace the whole floor and authorize it, or just the part that was damaged? Because a good portion, probably half of it was damaged. Hard to say, but typically it would work on a situation where you get you back up to where you left off, not replace it. And so after assessment of the age and assessment of all the different things, approval was granted to replace the whole floor. Okay. This particular policy and procedure that are there, the reason why this plays a role is if we were going to go out and say we're going to just put in our gym floor, like which we will at the middle school at some point, we would follow all of the bid laws and go out and go through the bid process. Because this is a replacement and it's time sensitive, meaning we've got to have this done in the summer so that we can operate next school year. There's a provision within the bid requirement procedure, section H, that I pointed out that allows, as long as we do this off of our small works roster and it's under $300,000, we can bypass the regular process. They give us bids, but I don't have to go through advertising in the newspaper for 2 weeks. We think we have everybody that does this work, that has given us. All 4 of them are under $300,000 with tax. One of them I think is a couple hundred over. And so it's really just board approval to say you're able to utilize policy and procedure 6220 section H to complete this process. Worked with our attorney on it to make sure it was all kosher.
I didn't see anything wrong with go ahead and doing that. Anyone else? Mike, did you have something? Maria?
Dan Ballard, didn't you make a comment
Before
regarding
we should do it?
regarding the policy and the guidelines and if it qualified or didn't qualify?
Dan has done the most recent work, like I said, with the attorney to reach out to this. We looked at our existing policies, and this particular one that he has identified, that section was vetted by the attorney, and so I'm obviously deferring to their opinion.
Okay.
But then I think they fixed.
I didn't, the way I would typically handle this is, I didn't make a call to the attorney until we knew that there was full replacement. With partial replacement, the cost is gonna be so much less, it's not gonna meet the bid threshold. Since all four of them were under 300,000 before tax, this came up and I wanted to, the way this all fit together is not something that happens all the time. I just wanted to make sure that if we go through this in this way, and the board says, yeah, this meets the threshold to use section H of that procedure, will the auditor see it the same way? That's the thing, the auditor's not gonna tell me up front. What I do then is call a lawyer and say, here's what we're trying to do, the person we use, and he said, yeah, you will be fine.
I just wanted to see if Dan
Yeah,
was paying attention.
these circumstances are a little unique is because you're using insurance proceeds to restore you back to your pre-loss situation. This is not state funds, it's not federal funds, which have much different thresholds, much different requirements and things like that. So it is a little unique in that it is a insurance claim. Proceeds from an insurance claim are being used for this expenditure.
For clarification, do we pay and then get reimbursed, or do they pay our contractor direct?
There's still been some kind of back and forth as far as that. I haven't gotten a final answer. Typically how it was handled before is we pay and then they reimburse us directly. I anticipate that will still be the way it'll be handled
There's
this
ways
time.
that we can handle that. We can borrow from ourselves. We have probably $1.5 million in impact fees that can't be used on this project, but the transportation cooperative is an example, because it was done on a 4-year payoff schedule, cash flow was a big problem. And so we borrowed from ourselves until the levy proceeds come in. We can probably follow the same mechanism.
I think that even better than that is that we just won't disperse any funds until we have, receipt or close to receipt of the monies from the insurance. So the amount of time will be very minimal, if any.
Isaac, any questions?
If she just asked what I was gonna.
We'll time it as such as we have the proceeds before
Yeah,
we release
so
the
we've
funds.
received bids already?
Charlie reached out and got 4, I believe.
From our small workshops.
And all of them were relatively close. They were all,
Not too far away.
they were all within about $10,000 or so dollars from each other.
Bids are to what specification? Where were those specifications?
That would be a question for Charlie.
Replacement of the floor.
Yeah, it's full
So what
replacement.
about painting and finishing, all that sort of stuff?
Striping and
Is the
finishing.
line gonna be at 9 feet or 10 feet or 11 feet? I mean, where were all those specifications written? I never saw that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it would need to be replaced back to the official striping, official, configuration,
That's-
space,
that-
distances and so forth for standard striping.
And what about the school emblem and that sort of stuff? Seems like all that stuff just kinda got blown over.
Where did you see that got blown over?
Well, because we never saw the specifications, how are they gonna build that? I mean, I'm coming from an engineering background,
no,
and I
I-
see screw ups all the time.
I don't
It's
think
like,
I don't think that usually comes to us.
well, I
but
mean,
if you wanted to-
if you have a bid, you have to have a bid to a excuse me,
Split
lose
line
my
item.
voice. Specifications, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
I would say if those things are not included, deal's off. We do it different, okay?
well, we provide those to them before they bid.
I understand. It restores it to its original place. And that's why Charlie was here, wasn't he? Okay.
So, the second question is, the only reason why we're going through this expedited process is to save 2 weeks on the bid process?
To make sure the floor's done before next school year.
Well,
It's more than 2 weeks.
it is more than 2 weeks. Okay.
2 weeks is there's a lot to it. It's a fairly time-consuming process.
I mean, I just wanted to be clear as to why we're rushing it, so,
Well,
I mean,
you don't have to. I want to be clear. I'm just requesting that we follow this way of doing it. But you can make that contingent, this is probably the way to do it, is that we want to make sure that H is only exercised under the current bids, but if all of this stuff was included, which would be restoring it to its original position, which includes the painting. It would include that, not just putting in a blank floor.
It's gotta look like wood.
I just want to make sure that there's, do some due diligence, that we have the correct specifications, as they're actually bidding on what we want done. Right?
I mean,
So there's no.
They may have their own interpretation of it.
it's, typically, it would be part of it, it's just, you just don't replace a gym floor without that being part of the.
It should be
The
all
same,
in
yeah.
that.
I would
It's gonna be-
think every company might have their own interpretation of that.
Well, it's a fair question, and I would say if you wanna wait, we can wait. Just to make sure, but I wouldn't move forward without, for sure.
So what do you need from us? You need us to agree to follow H on the bid requirements? What?
If you don't follow that, then we go through all of the bid process, we'll have to put it in these different publications for a couple of weeks. It'll take a couple of months just to probably work through that part, before we even get a bid.
So what if we do a motion to, follow procedure 6220, section H, with the stipulation that the bid includes, getting everything back to the original specifications that the floor is now.
And we'll need to provide those.
Yeah, and I'm sure Charlie did, he's just not here, because he's the one that does all the bidding and stuff, so, is everybody okay with that?
I'd be okay with that.
Okay, so can I get a motion to approve the use of section 8H on procedure 6220 with the stipulation that, the bid includes getting the floor back to the original specifications. And whoever wants to motion that does not need to say that, because Kayla got it. Do I have a motion?
I'm gonna motion specifically that we're following procedure 6220P, number
Which is the
H,
procedure, yes.
number H, and all the rest that Kayla has to lay with us.
So we have a motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, good to go.
Good to go.
I have a quick question before we 100% move on. So with this, approving of getting it to be done, do we get also a say of like what pieces go where? Of like our old gym floor?
We'll have to talk to Charlie about that.
I know
I'm
we
just
talked
curious.
about that last week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be an issue.
I mean, because if they're taking it out,
Yeah, we could get it.
it's not like they're gonna like want to.
They're not reusing it.
Yeah, they're not gonna use it, so.
No, but normally they can go in there probably with a little mini tractor and demo it.
But before they start though, Charlie should be able to go in there and cut.
Saber
Yeah.
saw around.
Because I feel like some of, especially if that's our original, it should honestly
Stay.
still say
Yeah.
it's original.
Or become wall art.
Exactly,
Yeah,
wall art,
to make it
or,
look cool.
or like an example like the Grand Ole Opry, how they kept their original floor in that wood circle, things like that.
So I would challenge you to run a little survey as to what they want to do.
Students?
Students, yeah, let the students decide where they want to put it.
I like that.
That's a good idea.
I'm gonna burst.
Go ahead.
You can cut out little pieces and stamp it. I saw it where and you can auction sell pieces of the gym floor.
Charlie said painting's part of it, he's gonna jump in. I'm not sure what
I got some, I'll take it if I can.
All right, let's go ahead with, while we wait on Charlie, we can go ahead and you wanna start your next hour budgeting presentation?
Part two, yeah.
All right.
Part two, there
This
we
is
go.
part two.
My return engagement here for part two.
Oh, Charlie's on.
Oh, okay.
Charlie, can you hear us?
You're muted.
Unmute yourself, Charlie. Hi, Charlie.
He's on his phone.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you now. So the question is, with the bid that you put out, does that include getting the floor back to exactly the same that it is now with painting and everything?
Yes.
Did you have questions for Charlie?
Did you send those specifications along? Do we know what those are?
The companies that are doing the floor replacement do not do the striping, but the guy that did the striping last time will be doing that. as part of the bid.
Okay, so what was it you provided, the companies that provided bids? Did we send them something?
Full gym floor replacement, and that, which included striping.
And so they all came out and measured it and asked questions, or what?
Yes,
And our insurance company was pretty well involved in some of this.
We walked the property pretty extensively, right shortly after the loss.
correct. And we took measurements, we had to measure, all of the, companies had the measurements. They knew what type of floor it was, to replace it with the same type loaded floor.
What about the wood? Is it all one
What kind of wood are they using? Is it oak or something else?
It's a maple,
A hard maple? Okay.
yeah. And all the gym floor wood comes out of, in the United States, comes out of the same place in, I think it was Wisconsin.
All right, any other questions?
Can you send those along or provide the,
The bids?
specifications that we provided or not?
The bids were shared,
I've got.
but I can forward the bids via email.
Okay.
I think that's it. Charlie, does anybody have anything for Charlie?
All right, thank you, Charlie.
Thanks, Charlie, appreciate it.
You bet, thank you.
Bye.
And Charlie, send out what you sent to them too, to get them to
Okay,
put their plan together.
sounds good, thank you.
Thanks, Charlie.
Bye.
All right, Dan, budget planning, focus on fund balance.
Okay, so Kayla, you want to bring that up if you could? The 24, the budget, the blue PowerPoint.
Hey, Brandy.
Yes.
I want to
There
talk
we
to
go.
you after here, I made something for your auction.
Perfect. Okay, let's jump right in here and I'll kind of quickly go through these. I don't want to try to keep to our time. So, next slide, Kayla. So this is the development process. We're so early on. This is just the team members. We meet on Wednesdays. We've been meeting for a few weeks now, probably 3 or 4 meetings. So we're getting representation. Dan is on that. Crystal Plotkin, our HR director, Anita Bickler, who's our payroll specialist, Dr. Douglas, who's our assistant soup and oversees student services, teaching and learning, Mr. Marin, and myself are the individuals that are on that group. Next slide. So there we go, legislative summary. So we had what's called a short session. Legislature recessed in early March. And so there wasn't a lot really that affected public education, but this is kind of the highlight. So one thing was the special education. They did increase the funding cap to 16%, was previously 15%, okay? Currently, we have 15.3% of our student population that is receiving full-time special education services. So that 16 will get us above that threshold, okay? However, we do have an additional, almost that many students in addition that are receiving at least some special education services. So we have just shy of 30% receive at least some level of special education instruction. So, so even though that funding, that increase in funding helps, it's certainly going to be short of the, funding the total cost. I like to refer to this as basically it helps to minimize the loss. It helps to eat away at the amount that special education is short at the end of the year. Increased material supplies and operating costs, or MSOC, $21 per student per FTE, again, full-time equivalent, not headcount, per FTE for 23-24, and then $28 more in 24-25. So, something there as far as that. Increased the funding factor for classified paraeducators and office staff for both 23-24 and 24-25. We'll talk about that a little bit more in subsequent slides. And then the official 203, as I mentioned before, is going to be next week, the week of the 15th of April. The estimates used in this presentation were derived from what's called an F203X option. It's a simulation tool that we believe aligns closely with the actual 203, but we will not have the 203 until next week. Okay?
It's just a software tool?
It's a software tool. It's the funding tool that they put together, Dave. So what we do is we plug our enrollment in, and then it spits out how much state funding you'll get based on those number of students. Okay, next slide. Again, prototypical school funding model. We talked about this before. It basically says how much you are funded, doesn't determine how you staff your district, but determines how much funding you get based on your typical school. 400 for an elementary, 432 for a middle, and 600 for a high. And again, note that we are a K-5 span at elementary, even though the model funds at K-6. So that 6th grade class, those 6th graders are being counted and funded at an elementary level, not at a middle school level, even though they reside within our district in middle school. So that's the highlighted part for it. Funding is generated based on the grade level reported rather than a school's classification. All right? Next page. So I talked about a little bit of enhancement. We did get a small amount for the prototypical school funding model. Contained within the 24-25 state budget were some fractional enhancements. So we get an additional 0.076 to fund for both paraeducators and office support staff. Okay, so that says if you had a 400 student elementary, okay, you would get a 0.076 more funding for those positions than you did the year prior. Okay, not a lot, a little bit, not a lot. This change applies to both 23-24 and 24-25. Monies paid for 23-24 are backfill for excess costs already incurred. In April, we will get the money for 23-24 delivered to us. Okay? That's going to be approximately $38,500. So for 23-24 in the month of April, we'll get $38,500. Just here's some money because of you were short and what you had to pay, and we're going to pay you some money for backfill. Okay?
Is that the increase?
That is the increase. That's the 0.076 increase, and they're applying that increase date to both this year and next year for those two classifications.
That's using the tool, right?
This is the prototypical model, yeah.
Okay.
You go through and increase it. So we're getting about $80,000 over the 2 years. You get $38,500 one year, you get about $39,000 the next year, a little shy of $80,000 over the 2 years. For the monies received for 23-24, there is no requirement that you go through and change employee salaries. Those are just backfill dollars. For 24-25, there will be some tests they'll put in place. So down below it says the superintendent, this is OSPI superintendent, shall develop rules that require school districts to use the additional funding provided in this under A of the subsection to support increased staffing, prevent layoffs, or increase salaries for the following staff types in the 24-25 school year. So there will be some rules to be determined, don't know what they are yet, where we'll have to demonstrate that the funding was spent appropriately. Okay. Next page. Continuing on the theme of how much do we get, well, let's look at this. These are just some various different groups. The source for this is what's called the current school-generated funding as of March of 2024, and the source for this, you can see the asterisk down at the bottom, is what's called the 1191 ED report. So if somebody wants to go and look at this, this is where the data came from.
So, Dan, question. The $38,500, it go, according to your previous slide,
Yes.
goes to fund only these positions.
For 23-24, it's just money that's given to us. We don't have to, it doesn't have to be passed through to anyone.
Okay, your footnote says increase the salaries for the following staff types. And there's your staff.
For 24-25, correct. It's saying that you're receiving additional funding for paraeducators and office clerical staff. So
Okay.
next year in 24-25, there will be some rules developed that we have to demonstrate that the money was spent appropriately. The additional enhancement was spent appropriately.
That's the 24-25.
24-25.
Yes.
23-24, there is no requirement to pass the money through to existing staff. There are no rules. Next year, there will be rules that we will have to meet. Rules are nothing new. We do that all the time. There's called PSES compliance. There's 17-to-1 compliance. We have all kinds of rules. We have to demonstrate how money is being spent appropriately. So that's, don't get worried about that. That's nothing new.
Got it.
We get rules all the time that come down. All right, but as far as how many staff does the model, the prototypical school funding model, so I broke it into some categories. I don't want to necessarily fixate on that, but school nurses and social workers and psychologists and office support, custodians, etc. The total funded for all those positions district-wide is 23.23 FTE, full-time equivalency positions. For those, we currently staff 34.6 positions. Okay? So,
We're staffing more than the fund.
correct, but keep in mind, prototypical school funding model, the overriding thing is it's a funding formula, it's not a staffing formula. Staffing decisions are made at the district level. Districts
not that
can
we're overstaffed,
staff
they
however they
just
want to staff,
pay for
okay?
that.
The model provides you a pool of funds. The district decides how to spend that and how many positions. Do you want more than you're funded for? Do you want less than you're funded for? Those are individual district decisions. But basically, the point being here is that we need to staff at a level above what we're funded for. Okay, next slide. So how do you fund the additional staff? How do we fund that shortfall of those people that we need, those, the difference that we showed on the last thing? Well, that's where we come in with these other sources of funds. We talk about federal funds, IDEA, special education, okay? Title I, disadvantaged. Title III, Title II, we don't really fund staff out of Title II, but you do PD and things like that. State, special education, categorical funding, LAP, TBIP, HICAP, a lot of the stuff we talked about in the first go around. And pilot grants, BEST, TPEP, Beginning Educator Support Team, teacher principal, I can't remember what EEP stands for.
Evaluation plan.
Evaluation, thank you. Too many acronyms, sorry. And then or local, out of property taxes. Local property taxes we use to fund enrichment. Remember, we talked about enrichment, those positions that the state doesn't fund, which are enrichment, okay? Then that's a justifiable use for local taxable resources, is to hire positions to provide enrichment to your students. Questions? Next slide. Staffing comprises approximately 83%. Again, we talked about this before, 83%, so that slice and pie before. 83% of the total budget. Currently, this is kind of the steps we go through as we say, okay, who do we have in staff for 23-24? Who's our current team, okay? It's the foundation for next year, because most people will stay with you. Some leave, but most stay with you, okay, or want to stay. Then we remove from the current year plan staff that are retiring or resigning. We've currently had notification from 8 CIS's certificated instructional staff, or teachers, that's the fancy word for teachers. 8 of them are retiring as of the end of this school year, okay? So we've got notification of 8. So obviously they're not going to be with us next year, they're retiring. Determine which vacated positions, so let's just give that example, of those 8, determine which of those need to be replaced. Do you need to replace all 8? Do you need to replace none of them? Do you need to replace some of them? You need to determine how many of those 8 you need, okay?
What's our typical turnover rate?
As far as teachers are concerned, it really varies from year to year. Some years we get a lot, this is quite a few. Some years we get very few. It kind of ebbs and flows.
From talking to folks who are planning retirement and stuff, we're seeing lots of educators. It's been a grueling few years, and so I guess I say that because there's more of I think there was 9 total, but of 8 of them are very senior employees. Been here a long time. And so we're just choosing to, if they're eligible, to do something else.
I think you're seeing a lot of that, not only with teachers, but in district office staff. You're seeing a lot of retirements, a lot of vacancies where people are either retiring or just doing a career change or whatever, but there's a lot of movement.
We are seeing a lot of turnover.
We have historically not had a lot, some years it's just varied. There's been years where we've had more than this, and there's been several years where we've had just a few, 1 or 2 or 3.
Okay, so we have 8, we know the 8 are leaving, we determine how many of those we need to replace. Okay, then the next step is determine any new positions that are needed for next year. So maybe there's some things that we need to add that aren't even here this year. Maybe we've got a new program, okay? We've got a new TK program that's gonna happen, we need to get that staffed. Or we've got something else that we're offering that we aren't offering this year, so you may have to add some staff to deal with student, capacity issues or student needs and so forth. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Apply the IPD, which is the implicit price deflator, okay? The implicit price deflator is essentially a metric of inflation, okay? Inflation is kind of a term everybody's, very familiar with over the last couple years, which is the general rise in the cost of goods is what that inflation is defined as, okay? The implicit price deflator, the one that might be more familiar to people will be the CPI, Consumer Price Index. That's one that people maybe are a little bit more familiar with. This is just a different metric that measures inflation. Well, the implicit price deflator is the amount that our revenues from the state are increased every year, But correspondingly, those are amounts that are typically passed through, or there may be an expectation of pass through to staff. So we apply the implicit price deflator, 3.7%, which would be for this upcoming year. Okay, that was determined from the state. Or what we call CCL, which is current contract language. Okay, current contract language may supersede the IPD. So it may say, you know, IPD or this number, whichever is greater. Okay, we have two contracts that are in place currently for next year. One is at 3.9% and one is at 4.7%. So those two are current contract language, so those groups will be increased by 3.9 and 4.7 respectively. Others will be most likely the 3.7. Make aggregate allowance for open contracts. We have one primary group that is open for bargaining this next year, which is PSC, which is our classified staff for 24-25. So we'll be starting having a preliminary meeting tomorrow to talk about bargaining. And then revise and refine. We go through and we do this process and we make revisions and we make revisions and make revisions. We have made upwards in a typical year as many as 16 iterations of this process. Gone through this entire process up to 16 times before we got to a final
We're on
budget.
the third or fourth.
Okay. And then just kind of a heads up, we've made a software conversion about a month ago like we talked about. Just making this process a little bit slower because we're learning a new software as we go through this. Next slide.
I get a couple comments on this. I just go up to the IPD for a moment.
Okay.
One of the things that, the IPD is tied directly with the prototypical funding model. You saw that we have 12 or 15 more employees. We don't get anything for that. But they still, for the most part, get the 3.7 or whatever it is. You don't just give it to some and not others. I will also comment on this 3.7. Not everybody will take it this year. That will be a small handful of people that won't. But there is a deficit when that happens, just because and so, you know, I just want, it's important to understand it's tied to that prototypical funding. So you get X amount of dollars. I've heard people say, well, it's 3.7, you actually get the equivalent to about 2%. I don't think it's quite that extraordinary, but it could be close. So where do you come up with the rest? You know?
Yeah, Dan is correct. The 3.7% increase is tied to the number of funded positions. Not the total number of your staff, but the number of funded positions. So back to the prototypical model, based on how many students you have, determines how many funded positions, and those funded positions are increased by 3.7% to give you your total resources. Okay?
Yeah, so the state's kind of using a wink to the CPI, you know, a little.
It causes problems. It's just big problems.
It's just a different basket of goods. The CPI is essentially what they call a basket of goods that a typical consumer would consume, okay? The IPD is a little different because the school district is a little different than a household as far as what its needs are and so forth. All right, next slide. Material supplies and operating costs, MSOC, we've talked about that multiple times, 17% of our budget. Inflation, okay, you know, inflation has become a way of life over the last few years. 3% is kind of the number that I'm hearing right now as far as base inflation. It's certainly come off its high, which was almost a 10 at its point. Now it's come down to about 3. The target for the Federal Reserve is 2. They've been trying hard to get there, but haven't quite gotten there yet. 3 seems to kind of be the sticky point right now, is about 3%. So that's something just to be mindful of, is that the cost of a good will most likely, on average, will be, for a good that costs you $1 this year, it'll cost you $1.03 next year. Okay. District, we just talked, nice segue, we just talked about we're going to get our gym floor replaced, which I think is a great idea. I'm supportive of that. However, keep in mind, we are in what's called a risk pool. Means that we have a number of school districts that are all insured under the Washington Schools Risk Management Pool. When they set rates, they set them at an aggregate level, which means that if you have, like, let's give an example, if Sultan as a member, maybe we had no claim in a particular year, but you had another member that an entire school burned down, and it was $50 million to replace that school. As a member, that $50 million loss that's at another district is going to impact your district. So you get the pluses and the minuses of being in a pool. You get the benefit of a lower overall cost because you're not one of one, you're one of many. So you get that volume pricing, but you also run the risk as you have losses at other districts, not necessarily just your own, that can impact the rates that you pay.
So it's group insurance and stuff.
Basically, it's a good analogy. Yep. So this year, in January, the loss that we talked about, there was a huge number of losses. They're estimating the losses in the tens of millions of dollars as far as what they're going to be paying out to various member districts that had other broken pipes and the same type of stuff, many to a much greater degree than we did. I mean, we got off relatively easy compared to some districts.
This standing at 5 or 6 schools. There was a school in Linwood, and this is where we run into the real problem. If you have a two-story school, the problem's on the top.
It's all the way to the bottom.
Is a problem. We don't have that issue. It still is a problem. It's just costly.
So my point being is that I fully anticipate we will have a rise in our insurance costs and our insurance premiums next year because of those factors.
So to offset that, we've already put $250,000 in the budget as a starting point to pick up an additional building, even though the new transportation cooperative is turned on, that will be turned off, so that'll offset it, but anticipating a rise in insurance.
Dan, since this is this like freeze and storms that happen, it's kind of a statewide issue. Is the state taking that insurance increase into account anywhere, or do they just?
Part of the increase that you saw in the material supplies and operating cost, the $21 for this year and the $28 for next year, is to reflect insurance.
So they are acknowledging.
They are acknowledging it. Again, it's not sufficient, but they have at least acknowledged it. Utilities and insurance were the primary drivers for that increase in material
So the
supplies and
21,
operating costs.
if you used our head count of, I don't know, I think it, maybe I just rounded off to 2020 kids or something, $43,000.
But yes, that was the primary reason for that increase was insurance and utilities. They sent out some questionnaires months in advance where they had requested information about what is your escalation in insurance costs, what have been your escalation in utilities, trying to build this case for that districts need more resources to pay for these services. We got a modest increase. All right, so anyway, I believe because of what we talked about, storm loss, you're adding a new building, a complete new building to the rolls. Anytime you buy a new car, your auto premiums go up, right? Because you've all of a sudden, you had a 10-year-old car and you buy a new car. New car is a lot more expensive to insure than the 10-year-old car was, okay? Same type of thing. You're adding a new building, a complete new asset to your rolls. That's going to increase your premiums. Storm loss, aggregate storm loss is going to increase our premiums. So yes, I think we need to recognize that is going to happen. Aging and inefficient facilities, we talked about that. They're just more expensive to maintain. And then we talked about, again, the $28 per FTE is in there, which is primarily utilities and insurance driven. Okay, next slide. This is just I've used this slide before. I get questions sometimes for, well, can capital projects pay for that? You know, why can't capital projects pay for that? This language comes right out of the school accounting manual as far as what fund is appropriate for what types of use. So I'm not going to spend time reading that, but that's what that is. Basically says what fund should take care of what types of obligations. Next slide. Okay, so I'm calling this, I picked this title, I said a system problem, not a Sultan problem. Because those maybe that are here or out listening online or might say, well, you know, did we do something wrong? Is this, you know, no. There are many other districts that are going through this. One of the lead stories in the Times right now is Seattle School District, obviously huge district, biggest district in the state. They're facing a $215 million shortfall over the next 2 years. Okay? They're looking at various things. North Shore has been very transparent. They've had multiple meetings where they're having to cut millions of dollars out of their budget for next year. So this is not, these types of conversations are happening in board meetings all over the state, okay, all over the country. This is not unique to us. Again, public schools, Washington State, small, medium, intermediate, large, having to deal with significant financial challenges for 24-25. Since 2018, districts have relied on a series of one-time monies. We had the McCleary decision, clear back in 2018, and then we had things like this alphabet soup, GEER came in, digital equity and inclusion, transportation funding shortfall, enrollment funding shortfall, LTR, CARES, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, school district emergency relief program, and on and on and on. These were either McCleary or more currently COVID-related dollars, federal dollars to address COVID. Okay? Districts have essentially used these proceeds to help mask some of the shortfalls in the prototypical school funding model. Well, a lot of those monies are gone now. They have been utilized. They were one-time monies, and they are now gone. So Next slide, Gil. So districts now are at the point where those one-time resources have been exhausted and they're having to reduce the size of their budgets correspondingly. I won't for the interest of time, but there is a link there. There's a really nice little video that was put together by ESD 112, which is down the Vancouver area. It is a couple years old, but it goes over a lot of really important things. It talks about regionalization. It talks about a typical school funding model. It talks about levy reduction. It talks about partial funding of FTE for staff. It talks about funding versus staffing. It talks about a lot of those things in a little 3-minute short YouTube video. So anyway, when you get a chance, I would encourage you to take a look at that. Basically, to summarize, our current situation has occurred over a period of years, and will take a sustained fiscal austerity to get us back to a more solid financial footing moving forward. And again, we're not alone in this. Currently, there are 4 districts statewide that are what are called in binding conditions. Okay, that's when you cannot put a budget together that has a positive ending fund balance for the upcoming year. And obviously, you don't want to be in that situation, because then again, a lot of your local control goes away. The state basically comes in and kind of takes oversight of your district and helps makes those decisions for you, as opposed to having local control, which is not what anybody wants. We value that autonomy. We value the ability to make those decisions at local board meetings like this. And so we want to do everything that we can to stay out of that situation. I think, is that the last slide here?
So
Oh, decisions, just decisions. No particular order. Social emotional needs of students, school safety, special education, transportation, overall staffing, MSOC inflation, growth challenges, curriculum needs, aging facilities, minimum fund balance. All of those things play into this building budget.
So this, I think what I would recommend, we've got 3 additional documents, 2 additional documents.
Two additional documents.
And to kind of really take a little deeper dive, and show you, here's where we are, and it helps paint a picture of where we need to go, and decisions we need to make. And you know, part of what this is you can see that the changes really needs to occur in people. And you have several people that have announced that they're not coming back next year, and so to the extent that we can fill things from within is part of what we need to consider this. Do you want to, Kayla, go to the budget summary, or
I'm not sure. It's the one it's the other one, Kayla. It's the other one. Yeah, sorry, I don't remember how I named. There we go. So this here is, you make it a little bit bigger. This is what's called, what we call an RPE. It's a Resource to Program Expenditure Matrix. And this is a tool that I use where basically it looks at various sources of funds. And we talked about federal, state, and local funds, right? Okay. Well, this breaks it into various different components of state, various different components of federal, and obviously your local, okay? So it starts local taxes, that's your property tax up there, the 4.115 million, timber excise tax, and so forth. It goes through these various different types. The notes basically says is what is the source or the methodology used to come up with that number. Many of these at this early point will be just taking the current year amount and rolling it forward to next year, because we don't know the award amounts in some of these instances, okay? Like your federal grants. We don't know what our federal grants are going to be next year, but typically they don't change a whole lot. They might go up or down a little bit, but they don't change dramatically. So we'll plug in this year's amount for next year. Once we get the actual awards, we'll go in and put in the actual amounts. So anyway, this comes down and it says total estimated revenues is going to be, scroll down a little bit, Caleb, $39,309,984. And then over to the right, you've got your, in the blue column, is going to be your salaries and benefits. Again, this is very early, very preliminary, but it's at 83.3%. Okay, that's what we talked about, 83%, 17%. That's the 83%, is $32,493,120. That's 83.3% of the total. The material supplies and operating costs is 16.7%, which was the 17 that we referred to, which is pretty comparable with statewide average. Okay? And you go down through here, so Kayla, why don't you go ahead and go to the summary on the next page. So we're going to take this, and this is more of a summary level. So your revenues and other financing sources, $39,309,984. Your expenditures and transfers is going to be $39,116,174, which means your income, I'm sorry, it should be black, sorry, that number should be black. Income or net from loss, you're going to be to the positive, based on those numbers, $193,811 in the black. Sorry that the word is red, I missed that. Anyway, you're gonna take in $193,000 more in income than you're gonna spend, okay? So when you go down to fund summary, you need to say, okay, how does this translate? Scroll up a little bit, because I'll look at those notes attached to that. So the fund summary says, estimated beginning fund balance as of 9/1 of 2024, 300,000. But there's a note, so that exploded note that you see to the upper right says factors not, thank you, factors not currently reflected in that 300,000 are safety net, amounts we receive from safety net. Currently, it's estimated to be 213,000. But based on what we submitted, it could end up being $200,000 higher than that.
Even a little more. We applied for 470.
Right.
We're just trying to do it conservative.
In these numbers, you budgeted for 200.
213. Yep, current higher, 200,000 higher than the current estimate of 213,000. So the current estimate is 213, but we could get 200 or even more than that. Whatever we get above the 213 adds to the 300. Okay? So that could make it 500. Very, very possibly, or maybe more.
How likely is that?
We will know in May. We'll get final determination in May. It's been submitted. It has to go through an extensive review process, so we don't know yet, Dave. But
All of the verbal things I've been told, Dr. Douglas fills all this out and works through is they have removed some of the barriers to getting a lot of the money back. As you know, right now, we have a student that is going to school in Missouri. Sounds a little unusual, but it's really happening. That's because there's a program that conservative grades, so we should get refunded for some.
Some other things. Dan's got some good information, good contacts with DNR. We're going to get some more Department of Natural Resources money. It may be late summer, it might be fall.
How much have you built in?
For next year, if we go to the detailed one, it's 385,000, something like that. Whatever the numbers you gave me were.
Did you put both that I gave you?
Yes, I gave you both. Both are in there. Go back, Kayla. And then last would be, the last one which we talked about before. In 23-24, you're going to get backfill payments for your classified staff. Remember, you're getting a backfill for your office and paraeducators for 23-24 of $38,500, which doesn't have to be flowed through. And you're also going to get $21 per student MSOC, which is going to approach approximately $80,000. So you're going to get those two backfill payments are not in there because those just came through recently. So those will add to that number. So that 300 could be 500, 600, you know, could vary, could double. I could see a situation where it easily could double to that number, okay? So we take that 300 though, based on what we have. We take 300, we see the results from operations, which is 193,000. Means we would end the year at $493,811. Well, our target, again, not 4%, but our intermediate target is $1 million. This is saying we're going to end at 493. The difference between the 493,000 and the million is the 506,189. Means you're short of your target, $506,189. Okay? Now, not included in that factor, just full transparency, not included, there's some pluses and some minuses. Not included in that is the cost of removal of all of our current staff. We're working on our first draft right now, but cost of removal of the people that are in the 23-24 budget that are no longer with us or were never filled. We have to add in there the cost of people who were hired to replace those people that exited. We have to determine additional positions needed. Remember, part of those steps was, you know who's leaving. You got 8 people leaving, which needed to determine how many of those 8 have to be replaced, right? Can you get away with none of them? Do you need half of them? We've identified some additional positions, or excuse me, the additional positions that aren't in the budget, sorry, of 24-25. An elementary specialist, which would be at this building, a psychologist, a .5 psychologist, a high school English language arts is kind of a challenge, and an elementary counselor.
So these would be in addition to...
Those would be additionals, and we're saying that would be about 300,000. What's that?
Elementary specialist is 0.5. Psychologist is 0.5. High school is likely 1.0. Depends on what we can do from within. There's some things we're working on. Elementary counselor is 50,000. There's a $200,000 grant that is that we are part of to get somebody to serve 190 days between both elementary schools and mental health. It's a great deal for that. Just received word the last few days that that's gonna happen and committed to. Because we're, you know, if you look at this school as an example, this is where all the pressure is as far as enrollment. You know, they're just, look at this is where they're coming to school.
So we're thinking reasonably, it'll be about $300,000 for those 4 positions, give or take.
But there's several positives to offset it. It's just making sure we can tell you crystal clear, black and white. We know. So the 8 that retired, a newer person on the salary schedule might be $50,000 less. You know, so, but you don't know where that's going to fall. And so we've had years where people have moved to another district, or we've moved states or whatever, you end up hiring somebody that's more expensive. So how that all shakes out, we just don't know yet. I've got a couple of questions, but one of the things I want to point out to everybody, you know, how do we know what our budget's going to be? Well, it's based on the enrollment. We're 25 students higher right now at this point in the year than when we started in September. So we are setting the enrollment very conservatively at our average, which is less kids than we have right now. Okay? Last year, going into this school year, with all of the homes being built and all of the things happening, we took a leap of thinking we were going to grow by 60 or 70. It didn't happen. It's not by that much.
So how many less is it that we're budgeting
About
for?
15 less than we are right now, something like that. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's about right.
So that's
The
a very
average,
conservative-
the average is, yeah, Dan is right. The average is slightly below where we're at currently.
Now, the thing that I want to clear up, I want to say, it's not a big deal, but when we were talking about kindergarten, the transition to kindergarten, we talked about how many kids would we potentially attract at Gold Bar, 14, 18 here. Actually, both programs will have 18, so we need to bump that one up by 4 kids.
It's currently in there as 14.
Yeah, I put it in as 18, I think is what I would say, because that's really what you're gonna do.
Okay.
46 kids that have, families that have expressed interest in both of those programs. You know, I'm being recorded, and I'm not sure what I'm gonna send this to, but I better start right now.
And then the last point 4 there is just saying that we've talked about inflation a little bit. Dan kind of touched on some of this, so I'm just going to read this. No allowance for currently no allowance for inflation of MSOC. We are using the 23-24 amount, just the total, as a placeholder, and plus 250,000. So I took this year's budget plus 250,000, and the 250,000 is for insurance and utilities for the new facility. Okay, that's what that's for. And then just kept it as that. So basically what it says is that this year's budget, this year's material supplies and operating costs, we would have to do 3% less next year if we didn't increase it by inflation, because inflation is going to go up about 3%. That $1 item is going to cost you $1.03. So your choices are either add 3% to your budget and continue business as normal, or buy 3% less and you overcome inflation by buying less. Basically, you just don't spend as much. Okay? You get less goods for the same amount of money.
What I would recommend that we do is you look at our exception reports in the coming couple of months and see where we are. Because we've made conscious efforts to spend less and see how it's performing. Because adding 200,000 when you're talking about really thin margins is a lot. Just to one area. You realize you only got 43,000 for MSOC, so now 200,000 just based on 3%. I would see where we're at.
I have a question on, so enrollment, so these budgeted numbers are budgeting for 15 less kids than we currently have right now, correct? Ish.
Ish, yes.
So, do you happen to know what we ended at the previous year and then what we started at? So like the year before, did we stay the same to what we ended, or did we drop?
Your annual average will tend to start to drop towards the tail end of the year.
Not the annual average, but the actual what we ended at the end of last school year, and then
Okay.
what we started with this school year.
I don't know the answer to that question, but I can find out.
There are
I can
some
look.
connections you can make. I've taken a look at, say, March before and say, if I go back 5 years and I look at our end of March enrollment, how does that relate to your September? See, and you can make some correlations.
Yeah,
They're there.
October tends to be your most representative count month. September can be a little low, just because you have late starters and they miss that initial count. October tends to be your more solid number, but we can certainly look at September and use that September versus
And Dan,
April or
is
September
transition to kindergarten included in the budget dollar number?
the dollars are there, yes. Just delivering 400 and some odd thousand dollars. The money is there. Comes from a different source, but the money is in there.
So if we have the same amount of students start next year as we have now, it's like, it's 15. How much money does that generate in revenue?
We can plug that in and find that out for you. So like I said, we're gonna increase it 4, right? For transitional kindergarten. Okay. So we'll do 4.
We put just budget speculation numbers in this actual budget. I don't think that's correct, because we will have, even if the kids that live in this particular service area can fill the spots, we will figure out how to get them.
So you said there's 46 families that want to enroll
Yeah.
in TK, and we're only gonna accept 36?
And of that, to give you, it's even a little less than that, because of the say 15 base in each class, we're gonna mix in a few developmental preschoolers, so kids are interacting with their same age peers, and not just going to a developmental special ed preschool per se. And I'm gonna bring you a plan next board meeting because of the space issues we're running into here, and just trying to do a broader job related to the board goal of early learning, move our developmental preschool over to VOA and the Qualitors of America. It'll all be under the supervision of our teacher, so there's commonality happening in ECAP. We had ECAP at one point up at Gold Bar, but it's under federal rules, and that square feet per kid, it was just a nightmare to try to follow. We just couldn't. And then, because you have portables up there as well, it didn't make sense to have, we just didn't have a room to it. So they moved down here to the VOA. And of 60 slots, they've been able to fill about 43. The problem, as I see it, is the income threshold is too low. Again, I don't know exactly how they calculate it, but it is, it's not very highly qualified. It's too restrictive. And when you look at what we've talked, this goes back to your time, Mike, when we looked at our, how prepared are these kids coming in as kindergartners, we're a K-12 system, but we still have to spend time on that because we're playing catch-up. If you don't, and that's a big strain on resources.
So my challenge then would be how can we get all 46 of those families, or those kids to
Well, that's what
attend?
we meet probably with VOA. Kirk Pearson's part of that, the former senator. He works for them. And there's probably 4 or 5 people, and we're working as a team to figure out how do we serve all of these kids the best that we can. And so I will bring an interlocal agreement to the business meeting at the end of this month that talks about how will that work moving our development preschool over there. That way we can bring the class in from the portable. It needs to be in a room in the building, and it'll give us some room if we need to grow that class.
So this are kind of the challenges that we're up again. It's still fairly early in the process. We had a meeting similar to this with the board, was in the middle of May last year, so we are approximately 4 to 5 weeks kind of ahead of where we had a similar presentation, but we don't have as much clarity as we had either. But 5 weeks from now, we'll definitely have a lot more clarity than we have right now. Start with the F203 next week. We'll make sure that the numbers are solid. We can make some make an adjustment on the TK kids, increase 4 there, and that will flow down more revenue there.
And so part of what my work is going to be, and it really has been, but it's going to continue, and is to really analyze class size and figure out, where, when 83% of your budget is people, you can see where reductions have to be. And it seems like a huge number, it's not abnormal. When I first heard those numbers years and years ago, I thought, wow, how can it be? But it makes sense when you think of what it costs to employ people and the benefits and everything. But it really trying to figure out what can we do from within to, because we're gonna meet that $1 million. We have to do this.
We talked today about, doing a board retreat, workshop or whatever, like we did the other one at the district office, going like into more detail on staffing and kind of getting into it more as a board, instead of just relying on, them to present us stuff. Is anybody interested in that? Like,
Yes, we have to go out on that.
yeah. So I think we would like to do that. That way we can kind of be more involved in this, what things that we think should happen instead of just being told.
I think, well.
Yeah, this information is very summarized at this level, at this point. It's purposeful, primarily because there's still a great deal of unknowns, and so we've kept things very, very summarized. But as we get more accurate, confirmed information, then we will start, as I said, revise and refine, revise and refine. We're getting it more and more accurate. We will go down and we'll start looking at all of our staffing. We'll look at everything in great detail.
Well, then if we can meet next month, then we can let you know too. It helps, like what we think the focus should be on.
Because that's what we need to do. We need,
Yeah.
and this is part of the fiduciary role, is to hire me to, carry this out and all the staff to do that. But I think knowing this, it's such a new board, that's why we kind of did this double dive today. Go through, Mike's been through this a few times, but we do need to do that. And we'll give you class size averages, we'll give you
It's going to be way more productive if we need more to have those in between.
So, question came up about portables, and do we need it? We haven't ordered any, but I will tell you that I had a meeting with the director of the Bellevue School District, who handles all of that, and they are trying to rid themselves of empty portables. So we can get them pretty short notice, because their district is losing them.
They should pay us to take it.
Yes.
So for the cost of hauling them, which can be $20,000 just to do that,
But would we be giving them for practically?
practically. As I found out when I bought a $1 portable, nothing is free.
Yeah.
Nothing is like it seems.
No, it's not, it's cheaper. Doesn't mean it's cheap, it's just cheaper.
It is.
Well, $1
Well, the
haul.
portable actually cost $1. Hooking it up to
Yes.
electricity,
Can't
doing
believe
the
Bellevue
dirt
wants to
work,
bring that.
getting it balanced, having all of the inspections, cost $200,000 by the time you for that $1 portable.
So do you need any decisions from us tonight? Or can
No,
we
I
do
just,
our-
if you have some questions that are concerning, or if you have a specific focus, I'm gonna keep on the path that I'm on. We talked a little bit, we meet Wednesdays at 1 p.m. If a board member wants to join us, you're able to. It would be great if we had the same person that came to all of them, rather than somebody different. And we don't wanna have a forum, because then it comes, we have to announce it as a board meeting.
We can discuss this evening.
Yeah, no, I don't think we need anything specific. The purpose of tonight was to make you aware that we do have work to do. That this is, it's always a challenge. This year, maybe a little more so, as far as bringing forth an approval, what we call an approvable budget for read. That typically would be, first read would be in July, second read and adoption would be in August. So we do have a little bit of time, but we've got a lot of work to do too. A lot
Well, I
of work
think
to do.
as a group, I think we would like more participation in the budget process than previous years.
Okay.
So my question, when you look at the committee, so where do the school principals and such get involved in the budgetary process?
The school principals, they're not that, other than they obviously petition for staff. If they anticipate, we give them the numbers as far as, well, just take an elementary. We'll look at the enrollment and we'll say we're projecting head count at X number in these particular grades next year. And if that number is bumping up a little high, they might say, well, I'd really like to add another teacher to get those class sizes down at, let's say, 5th grade, okay? those are the kind of that's the kind of input, Mike, that we typically see from them. They get their building budget, which is their discretionary fund to use here for supplies and so forth. And then they typically provide Dan. A lot of times Dan has those conversations with the
Have we
principals.
tried adding them to this process before?
They are in it more so than I think. I have discussions with them regularly, but I'll just tell you, one of the things I told the principals earlier was, we're gonna see some postings at elementary right away, because we know we can't go without them. We have more questions at the secondary, just because you've got, especially the high school's more complicated. You've got SVO, Sky Valley Options, you've got SVA, Sultan Virtual Academy, and you've got the staffing at the high school. And so part of them building the schedule is some of their involvement, and however far along they are in that process, because I will get requests for, here's what we want to do. It's hard for me to, they wouldn't really be too involved, they can be, I suppose, in the overall budgeting process. But we're talking about some stuff that it might bore the most flexible people to death, trying to go through some of this, just being honest with you. And we're only 3 meetings into this. Like Dan said, I think it was May, it was a month later at least, that we had this
4 to 5 weeks.
same meeting last year, that our fund balance was not as, it wasn't as low. And I'll just tell you, and I'll take responsibility for it, I've tried to keep the class sizes low work. We don't have the luxury of doing that. And that's where we have to take a look at it. And that's where some of it's gonna have to increase. Doesn't mean that they're gonna go to a terrible spot, but I'll show you the numbers.
Well, I think if we can get a board member on the budgeting committee, and then we do a meeting next month, or whatever, Kayla, can you send out some possible dates?
I think we should do it soon,
Yes, soon as
very
possible.
soon.
I think, does anybody have anything else about budgeting stuff? Cameron?
I think it'd be a little important though to involve the principals a little bit more than we have in the past, just because I feel like they have to also spend the money that we're giving them, so kind of knowing exactly what they're getting ahead of time, instead of just getting moved a little bit, I feel is important, because they're a big part of this process, especially with money and what they have to work with the students. So I feel like keeping them more involved is important to have them, one, feel more involved with what's going on with their money around them, but then also just a good idea to keep it.
I agree, just working across industry, I mean, multiple industries, government all the way to the military, you name it. A lot of times, if you can involve some of the individuals at the ground level, the buy-in is there. You don't hear, and I know it may take a little bit longer, but if people start to be able to generate, say, this is what I need, it doesn't always, everybody's gonna understand that we may be in a shortfall. We may have to come back and say, you know what, we may not be able to meet all of that, but what are the things that are super important? And if we help involve those in each department, then it can be communicated and begin to help at least an understanding. Maybe people may not like it, but at least an understanding of why we're doing certain things at all levels. So, and that's just the experience that I have had from previous lives, looking at a lot of budgets. And the more we can get people involved, at least then there's an understanding. Might not like it, but at least an understanding.
I don't disagree, and I think, honestly, very few decisions have been made. Just having posted certain positions as we're finding out that we don't need any information.
So we have time to add building admin to this budget meeting.
Like the official, everything we gave you is a forecast. The official tool doesn't get released until next Monday.
That's true.
That will tell us kind of where we're at.
So let's get
I think
them
we're
invited.
close, but not sure that there could be some anomalies.
I'm not saying that, and maybe it's not every principal, maybe it's 1 or 2 that can sit on there and help. Maybe you involve a teacher, or
We're
2.
definitely involved as far as discussing staffing, and I think this year would probably be a little bit of an anomaly, because there's positions we would normally post, because business as usual. Just go post them, but until we have some better information, it's the one thing we have control over. So it's a matter of not, the part we didn't discuss there, did you have the athletic director on there?
I did not, but we got
So,
missed for some
that's
reason.
an example. athletic director position is open, and need to post it. And so the question is that right now it's posted, it was served in the past as 2 periods of teaching, the rest as an athletic director. We're gonna do it the same, we're gonna do it different. And that's information that we've gotta figure out. Some districts our size have it completely with assistant principal stands. We made a conscious decision not to do that for a bunch of reasons. And I met with a couple coaches, in the middle school and the high school principal, middle school and high school coaches, and middle school, high school principal last week before spring break, and talked about these different models. We went right down the list, and it's always kind of a difficult decision in a district our size. Are you gonna do that? Is that gonna be a full-time position, or is it gonna be other duties assigned as well? And that's a hard one. And so we tried, when we moved it from the assistant principal, as it used to be, into a teach 2 periods AD the rest of the time. And that's where we left off. But it's gotta be open, and we're trying to figure that out. I haven't posted it just because we're trying to work through this budget stuff.
So the theme that you're gonna see from districts, and you're starting to see it in the news already, is that districts, by and large, statewide, will be looking either to reduce their budgets, or at best case, try to keep the status quo. But you'll see few, if any, are looking to add this upcoming year. So I think, what we're hoping for is that we can keep the amount of cuts to a minimum, is the goal.
Mike, did you have anything else? Mary Ann?
So I would hope, and I don't know, I just throw this out there, if we can get a date, I don't know if next week is possible,
For the,
retreat,
yeah, I'd do it next week.
that would be fantastic.
Is there a date, we just decided right now, is there a date that does not work for anyone?
Wednesday. Unless it's later, what time would we do it?
Does it work like at 4 to, like, is that decent? Like 4 to whatever?
I can do 4, so 4 just now.
I can't do Thursday before church.
Could we do, Mike, what about you? What about Thursday, like at 4 o'clock?
Well,
I can do Thursday. I volunteer.
She said not before 2.
I volunteer on
before
Thursdays
two.
at the senior center lunch.
Gotcha.
Before 2 o'clock?
Yeah. So what if we did like a 4 o'clock on the 18th?
Lunch gets done at 1.
4 o'clock on the 18th.
4, I can do 4 o'clock on the 18th on Thursday.
I could do that.
What day was that?
Thursday,
18th.
the 18th, Thursday.
I would appreciate it. And do you want us to invite a couple of principals?
Well, let's see if,
That would be awesome.
Mike, are you available that day?
Yeah.
That's after 4, right?
Yeah, so
4 o'clock,
the
yeah.
18th, 4 o'clock. Let's do principals, not maybe like the whole time, but for part of it.
It's like 4 to 4:30 with principals, and then, so they can come right from work and then leave at 4:30.
All right, we good with that?
Invite all the principals and whoever can show up.
Are we gonna do it in this room or at the Lido?
I think we should probably do it in here, but I have to check and make sure we don't have it set up for Sunday. We don't have enough room.
Well, let's do the setup like over there where
Or
we're.
I think there's a portable that we can access.
I like that purple over there, the one we did the bargaining.
So it'd be helpful to me to kind of get an idea of what all we'd like to cover at that meeting. I will, in full disclosure, I will say, the amount of new information we probably have between now and then could be limited. Again, the 203 is scheduled to be released the week of the 15th,
Well,
not
that's
on the
fine,
15th.
Yeah, I can get in touch with everybody and put.
I'm happy to meet, I
everybody's
just,
wants together
you know.
of what we wanna talk about.
So maybe we should schedule a second one a week later in case he needs to cook. It sounds like he's not gonna have the information.
I'll have some, I will have,
We can have class size that.
Yeah.
oh yeah,
we'll talk
yeah,
about
that we can, yeah, I just want to know what all we'd like to cover, and we certainly could maybe have
The
everything.
teachers we want to replace, the ones we don't need to replace, we can discuss
Yeah,
that.
based on.
Okay, we can certainly have those discussions, certainly have.
Can,
And then if we need to make another one,
Yeah,
Look,
there you go.
And then,
I put it in mine as
we have executive session? Does anybody have anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.